It's great to meet you. Hi.
Nice to meet you too. Hello.
So you come highly recommended. I'm trying to think who it was that recommended me. It was
Jason. Yeah. I don't even know Jason that well. We've only met.
Okay.
I mean, we've been friends on Facebook for a while, but.
Right. Is that how he came across you and kind of like tracked with your work or what you're doing?
Well, like I said, we've been friends on Facebook for a long time. We have a lot of friends in common.
Right.
Always see each other on other people's comments and stuff. He had me on his podcast not too long ago.
Sure.
But I have known him. I've been aware of him on Facebook and been involved in conversations with him for probably about a year.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah.
But got to know him a little better recently. So.
Yeah. No, cool. He recommended it. He's like, oh, you need to check out this one. She's got amazing stuff. Like, you'll really like talking about this and stuff. And so I was like, all right, well, give me a link or something. And he's like, oh, here's her Instagram. And I looked at your Instagram and I was like, I know nothing about you apart from that you are crushing it. Like, just absolutely destroying weights, everything, personal fitness. But I was like, I don't know any more about any form of what she's doing.
Well, I was surprised that it came through Instagram because Facebook's my main thing.
Oh,
that's where all of my stuff is.
Oh, wow.
Instagram is totally just my bodybuilding.
That's so funny.
I have some of it on Facebook, but all of it's on Instagram. So I was like, okay, that was interesting.
That's funny. You know what? He probably just knows me well. I hate Facebook.
Oh, I know. It's a cesspool on most days.
I'm like, no, if I can avoid it, I do. I've got a page that I like automatically post. The Instagram goes to the Facebook and I check it like once a day for some comments and I'll like some stuff and maybe reply, but I just don't want to go there.
I know.
So he probably knew me well.
Yeah, probably.
That's awesome. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you're doing? Why Jason recommended? He mentioned that you, we're just kind of diving in, by the way. I don't know if that's okay. How much time have you got? Are you okay for time?
Yeah.
You're pretty open? Yeah, cool. We usually go anything from an hour and a half, longer even if it's flowing, but
that's unusual.
we'll stop. The reason is like you get such better content when you go in deep with someone. And generally speaking, like if you're writing a book or if you're doing, it's like, well, tell me about your book. And then, okay, like, and everyone's got their little pitch and they do the same pitch on every podcast and then they get the same 3 questions and people listen to exactly the same podcast on like 5 different podcasts. And it's like, oh, I'm done.
I just said that to somebody yesterday. I said, I feel like I say the same things all the time, the same comments, the same stories, everything.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll go into some totally weird and wacky, wonderful places. Because I like it to be a little more casual, a bit more relaxed, and then hopefully we'll just see what sparks interest. But from my understanding, you are writing a book, and you can correct how terribly wrong I am, about the process of grief that one goes through when they start deconstructing, losing their faith, readapting what their faith looks like. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was very interested, or I became very interested as I was going through a deconstructive process myself. I became very interested in, obviously, all the emotion that you feel going through it. And as I began to identify those emotions, I started to realize that much of it looked like a grief cycle.
Sure.
And then I thought that's really very accurate to how I'm feeling. I feel like I'm grieving. I don't know exactly what I'm grieving. And I'm sure that'll be different for every person. Some people are grieving God. Some people are grieving relationships.
Yeah.
Some people are grieving themselves. Some people are grieving all of it. But across the board, if you mention that this is like grieving, almost every person will go, oh, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that became very obvious to me, and I just got very interested in that. And originally it was a topic for my dissertation, for my doctorate.
Okay.
And that was what I was going to write on. But my dissertation's about 2 years away. And I really felt, because I was living it, like I need to get this out of me. So I wrote it from a very anecdotal standpoint, not a scholarly standpoint.
Sure.
Which I'm hugely nervous about, because I can write scholarly. That's not a problem. I start writing anecdotally and I'm like, everybody's going to hate this.
That's so funny. Once you've lived in that kind of scholarly world for a while, you're like, oh my God, this page is disgusting. It's only got like a third of it is footnotes. What am I, an amateur?
Exactly.
You're actually just writing some stories about people deconstructing. The last thing you need is like, footnote number 83 for this one chapter.
Yeah, and there's not very many footnotes. As I said, it's mostly my experience. And so it's also very vulnerable to put everything that you've gone through out there, because immediately you start wondering who's going to identify. Is anybody going to identify, or am I the only weirdo on this little journey? And then you start wondering, like, well, some of the things that felt abusive to me is probably nothing for somebody else. So they're going to go big deal. So there's all these psychological things that are going on when you write anything.
Oh, of course. I mean, especially when it's personal. I mean, like I can get nervous. I can write a theological blog back in the day. I used to do a lot of that, and I'll be like, here's my black and white opinion on how I figured out the Bible, and no one else has figured out this verse yet. And you're still like, oh, I hope people like it.
I know.
Enough likes. I hope people don't send me hate mail or whatever. Yes. But like when it's like, oh, I hope people like it, and you're talking about yourself, I mean, it's like your identity can't help but be a little intermingled with the story, right?
Yeah, there is a piece of you that that feels very vulnerable to, if people don't like it, what does that say about me? And we can all claim that we're independent and we don't care what anybody thinks, but that's all bull. Every one of us cares what other people think. So
have you been quite public in your deconstruction, or is this going to be quite okay, so you're not too worried about like your friends like picking up this book and going, what the hell? Or
I lost all my friends.
Okay,
I lost all my friends.
Great.
So, exactly. I lost almost I would say the very large majority of my relationships I lost. Which was of course very hurtful, and it brought about a lot of anger. And so that was very difficult. So I've been very, very open about it. One of the reasons that I am on Facebook as much as I am is because that's now my community. Those are my people.
It's good for that, isn't it? Because you do suddenly get ripped out of this little local bubble, a community, and you go, where the hell are all the people in this area that have been abused and hurt by church? Because they're not gathering in churches, right? And so you could have 10 people on your street that are falling into that bracket,
and you wouldn't know it.
But you go on Facebook and you start searching or whatever, you can find little groups here and there, and it's not the same, but it's lifeblood as well, isn't it?
It's very helpful because nobody wants to feel like they're alone.
No.
And this process or this transformation or whatever we want to use to describe it often makes you feel as though you are alone, or like nobody else can understand or identify with what you're feeling or experiencing, and
no, it really
it's not true. Lots of people can, but it's still a very, a closed in, I'm all alone feeling. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially because most of the people you do know are identifying very differently. If almost every relationship you have, if you've been a quote unquote good person within the church, it shouldn't have too many relationships outside the church, really. Just those few that you're evangelizing, but outside of that,
that's right.
We're a close-knit
true.
community, and it's very cult-like behavior in a sense. Not to say anything particularly like it's intentionally cultish or anything, but it's just that's how cults form, isn't it? And that's how they operate.
It does come down to that. I mean, I can remember hearing when people left our church, and then something bad happened in their life. Well, they left the church, and I used to think, what a horrible thing to think. And now I wonder what's been said about me. What wild stories are out there, because life is life, and we're all going to struggle and stumble along the way. And so if automatically that's associated with you no longer communing in a certain community, that's pretty damaging. And I think a lot of people experience that.
Oh, 100%. If you're in the community, it's a spiritual attack, and we need to be praying for you and come around and support you. If you left the community, it's God's judgment.
That's right.
And protection. Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So how long ago did you go through deconstruction? Like, talk a bit about that journey for you.
Well, first of all, I'll say that I don't think we ever stop going through it once we start. And so I have a little bit of an issue with the whole idea of people deciding that you should be done with deconstruction. I don't think it's their place.
The whole need for like, deconstruction is fine, but when are you going to start reconstructing?
When are you going to reconstruct? Yeah, that's
which means when are you going to come back and rebuild what you already had before, but just maybe tweak it.
When are you going to get your next box? When is your next box going to show? Yeah, that's my personal soapbox lately. But it's been about 7 years ago that it started.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it starts very subtly. You don't even realize what's happening, or at least I didn't. I mean, I can't speak for everybody. Everybody's experience is different. But it was just a basic question in my mind that showed up out of nowhere, and I considered it and then put it aside, but it kept coming back.
Right.
And so then I started to be more vocal about my wonderings about it, which didn't put me in a very nice place with people in my church.
Yeah, well,
you're not allowed to look like you doubt,
isn't it? I mean, you're uncomfortable with it. That's why you're asking questions, and then other people start going, "Why are you making me uncomfortable? I don't want to deal with this."
Well, that's what this all comes down to. I think that people that are experiencing, what we've coined as deconstruction, have found so much pushback because And that in itself is very psychological. People don't want to be challenged about what they believe unless they're ready to challenge what they believe. Otherwise, if you make a good point, they now have to question everything they believe.
Yeah.
And so they'll avoid it at all, in every way that they can, even separating themselves from you so that they're not, affected by you somehow. So
yeah. From my understanding, so I'm not a psychologist, I have to say that a lot.
Neither am I yet. So
there you go, perfect. So let's figure that whole world out right now. So it sounds like you're probably a little bit further along than me.
Maybe.
But from my understanding, the brain primarily is wired for safety. So generally speaking, it doesn't give a crap what's true. It's like, well, that might be true, but actually what's going to keep me safe right now? And I think in the sense that we've evolved to be very tribal, a lot of the time that safety is what keeps me in this group. And when our groups and structures are built on believing percent of a list of beliefs, or, intellectually ascending to certain things, someone challenging one of those things suddenly makes me go, I don't feel safe.
Right. Absolutely.
What fascinates me is, and I don't know if this is stages of psychological development, maybe we get to a certain stage where we start developing, where we can kind of start breaking through that kind of need for safety, or maybe we shift in how we perceive safety. Maybe we see safety as figuring out what's really true. Maybe that's a much more important parameter for safety. But how do you see people taking that shift? Because it's obvious when you go back into that community and you start going, hey guys, I've got this amazing truth I figured out, or there's no hell it looks like this, or or whatever, God's not a guy, it's a woman as well, or whatever, or there is no God, or whatever extreme spectrum that there is.
All of
it doesn't really matter. They go, danger, danger, danger. But what is it that causes people to take a step out of that to not see it as danger, to start, you start asking these questions, and you don't go danger, danger. You don't just go, let's go into cognitive dissonance and shut that down.
Right.
You go, I've done that enough, I'm going to move forward. You don't have any thoughts? I think about it a lot.
Well, I think it's going to be different for every person.
Right.
We all, of course, come from different familial backgrounds. We have different experiences educationally, culturally, societally. Personalities are all different. So there's so many variables involved. It's hard to pinpoint, I don't know that there's any one thing that causes this to be okay. I think it's something internal within us. And I think that it happens when we're ready for it to happen. I don't think we consciously know that, but I think somewhere within our psyche, there's a shift that maybe now is the time to start considering other things. There's lots of different theories on that, actually. I mean, one of my favorites is Richard Rohr, and he makes the comment that the first part of your life is about building your box, which of course has things in it, but the second half of your life, and he even distinguishes that that's different for everybody, is about deciding what should be in the box. And that's kind of what this process is. Now you're deciding what needs to be there, but how you got there, I don't know. I don't know where my question came from. I don't know where it came from. Right. I just know it showed up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I tried.
What was the question?
It was nothing more than a Bible verse. It was
really?
Because I was a preacher, I was a teacher. I had been reading the Bible since I was a kid. It wasn't new.
Yeah.
But the verse that he who knew no sin became sin that we might become the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. And I was raised to believe, or I don't know that I was actually taught this, but I grew up believing that I could lose my salvation. And so I had to constantly be on this narrow road. And all of a sudden this verse one day popped into my head as an adult, and I went, how do I unbecome something that I never did anything to become? And then I went, no, I don't know. And I went on. But then that question just kept coming back, it wouldn't leave me alone. Yeah. And I thought for a long time, God's trying to show me something. I really think God's trying to teach me something. And so, I have to explore this a little. Yeah. So I started having that conversation with my pastor, and that was very uncomfortable. So there was all kinds of things, but nobody could answer that question for me.
Wow. And so you didn't even just, because there's obviously groups of Christianity that go, oh no, you can't lose your salvation. Right. It's eternal. So right. I'm sure if you, Googled enough, you'd come across different positions that go, oh no, don't worry, Michelle. Look,
right.
You can interpret it in a slightly different way, and then it's fine. that wasn't satisfying either, enough that you would stop kind of going on this journey, presumably.
Well, I think the first thing, I'm kind of a rebellious person. I'll own that. I always tried to be a very good Christian woman. I was just horrible at it. But I still tried. And I think the thing that upset me the most was that my pastor so easily dismissed it as though it were not an important question, and actually wanted to shift the conversation and make it seem as though I was trying to suggest that there was no such thing as sin. And I didn't say that. I have different thoughts on that now, but I didn't say that then. And so the fact that it was so easily dismissed kind of annoyed me. And so finally I just reached the decision. I said, it's cool if you don't know, but I'm going to go find out. And so then I started reading every book I could get my hands on, podcasts, sermon, everything you could think of. I went and explored. The only problem with that is none of that gives you answers. It only provides more questions. Yeah. And so suddenly you're down the rabbit hole. Yeah. And you're like, how did I get here? So, I don't know that I ever got a satisfactory answer to my question at that point. But it did start the process of questioning a lot of things.
It's so intriguing to me that you never know these things, but it's so intriguing. You hear that story and you go, what if he'd gone, hey, that's a really good question. I struggled with that too. And I don't know 100%. This is where my conviction leads me. I still feel like more like this, but you could try this, check this book out. That's got a different view or perspective. Would you still be sitting in that church today? Maybe not, but like, it's
I don't think so.
It's such a different, the fact that his response was so shut off to your question that you immediately just turned around and went, I'll try everything else then.
Well, it was very defensive.
Yeah.
It wasn't just his response, it was his wife's as well. It was very defensive. Like, how could you wait a minute? And so like I said, it struck me as kind of annoying. Like, well, hold on, because I've never been good at somebody telling me I can't do something. So it was like, okay, this obviously needs some more thought or discussion somewhere. And like I said, I was totally cool if he didn't know. All he had to do was say, I don't know what to tell you. I really don't know what to tell you. And I would have been like, okay, I get it. That's fine. But it became almost that he was threatened somehow by the question. Or that was my perception anyway. I won't speak for him. But that was my perception, that this question is somehow offensive. And I'm not clear why. I mean, and this, of course, led to different discussions, but one of them that I happened upon was the idea of universalism. And of course, that'll put you in a really bad place with a lot of people. Yeah. But in my mind, in trying to understand everything, I even asked a few people, I'm like, well, as a Christian, shouldn't you hope that's true? Even if you don't believe it is, shouldn't you at least go, yeah, that would be really cool if that were true? Yeah. And to a person, I've never found anybody other than people who I identify as universalists that'll say that. They're all like, well, no, because, so-and-so has to go to hell. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah, we all have someone that has to burn, right? Yeah.
So I couldn't even get somebody to admit that much, so at that point it starts to feel very hypocritical, and you go, okay, this is all a scam. This is a lot of people with some very jaded ideas that have decided this is how I should believe, and they don't get to make that decision. Yeah. So like I said, I got pretty rebellious about it, pretty angry. Yeah. So it's led me down the road for sure. So my expression of grief has centered a lot on the anger side. Okay. Where other people's won't, because their experience is different, but that's where mine is kind of camped for a few years. So better now.
Because that's a very common thing, and it's also a common response. So you'll typically hear from people in the church, whatever, people have left because they're just angry, they're bitter, they're hurt, they're wounded, as if like people getting hurt by the church and the problem is they're hurt, right? Right. Not the problem that someone hurt them. Maybe we should turn this on ourselves and go, why are people getting hurt in our churches? But no.
Well, that was actually a very big part of why we were no longer invited to be in our church. We were told we were leaving. We didn't choose that. Yeah. And as you mentioned a little bit ago, maybe if things had been done differently, would I still be there? I'm pretty sure the answer is still no. Yeah. Just because there were a lot of people struggling and leaving at that time. And I was, as somebody who was considered a leader in the church, I was hearing a lot of things from people. And I was trying to reconcile that with the leadership and say, what's happening? And my husband was on the board. He was doing the same. And we had two very good friends, that the husband and wife, and they decided to leave. And we knew all the details. Everybody else that had left, we didn't know the details, and we didn't ask because that's gossip, and you don't do that. No. But we knew the circumstances with these people, but it wasn't what we were hearing. And so we actually went to the pastor and said, look, this has to be figured out. He was our pastor was our very good friend. And so it had been for years. So I thought, this is just a conversation between friends. And it turned out it wasn't. They're your friends until you realize they're not. And that was deeply disappointing.
Yeah.
I mean, our kids dated. I mean, we spent holidays together. I mean,
gosh, that could have been
awkward. We were friends. Right? Yeah. That would have been really bad, but we dodged that bullet. So.
Yeah, that would be an interesting Christmas, Thanksgiving, everything. I don't know.
No.
It's fascinating to me how much of a dynamic that is. So, like, it intrigues me. I read, I mentioned this in the last 4 podcasts. I've had a lot of interesting, similar podcasts recently. But I just finished reading through a book, and it's associate study as well by Packard and Hope. And the book was called Church Refugees, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Great book. And I read through that, and it was fascinating how many of hypotheses they had going in, which were just all wrong, like everything. Like, and it was funny because they're coming from a background, at least within the book, I don't know them at all myself, but from how they come across in the book and how they describe themselves, they're coming from within the belly of the beast, as a sense. They're coming from the church observing the de-churched. And obviously de-church is a slightly different group with overlapping components. Lots of people deconstruct stay within church, and that's complex. But it's fascinating that their primary premise was like, oh wow, the main reason people leave church, it seems, is not because they're hurt or they're wounded or they have differences of opinions or any of these things. It's because, generally speaking, when they have difference of opinion, when they want to be authentically themselves and ask a question or share an opinion or be themselves, they're told you can't do that here. There is not an opportunity for them to be themselves in the community, to be heard, to be validated on their journey. And that was across the board. They found like almost every person had that experience. The research we're doing, I do research with the deconstruction movement as best I can. I'm working with a research company in the UK to kind of do that. And so it's small just now. We've got a group of about 300 active participants that are doing regular surveys. And early indications are that is very much the case. It is not my belief changed. It is not, the church hurt me, or I heard about someone being abused, or, a lot of these different theories. What's interesting is those things happen, and what people do is they try harder. They try to change from within, or they maybe leave that church, but they go straight to another church. They want the church to win. They want that community. And it just feels that, it fascinates me because it feels like there's this opportunity. There's this thing. Now, I don't really give a crap about going to a local church personally. I've got a thriving community. I love life. I do life the way I do it. I'm not keen to go back into something that's institutional. But it does feel like the institution is sitting on a precipice, and they could respond if their power structures and their structures of how they operate and how they need to believe could shift, could adapt. It feels like they could be keeping a lot of people that are going through this process.
So?
Would you agree on your kind of perspective of seeing
I think I would. I think some of the biggest complaints that I've heard, of course, were not necessarily belief oriented, but more the atmosphere. That church had become a very corporate feel. And that was true for me too. I was experiencing that in addition to, because it wasn't until after I was asked to leave the church that I really went down the rabbit hole with what I believed and everything. It was, at that point, it was, how I was feeling about the church itself. What was it doing its job? Or was it just more concerned about existing? And that's what it felt like to me. It felt like it's a business now. And we have to have enough people in the door to bring in enough money to run this business. And it just didn't jive with me. That didn't feel authentic to me as to what I thought we were supposed to be doing as Christians. And so I was already struggling with those questions.
Did the church
feelings as well
change, or were you in a different position within the church to see it differently, or how do you perceive that looking back on it?
Well, the church itself was a pretty small church, in comparison to a lot of other churches. I don't think we were ever more than 125 at our biggest. But so, there's an old stereotypical statistic that is given out. I don't know how accurate it is that, 20% of people do 80% of the work in a church. Well, I think that bears out a lot of times. I know that even in a church that small, there was a set group of people that did the majority of everything. And my husband and I were a part of that. As I mentioned, I preached, I was a teacher. I ran a discipleship program. I was a worship leader. My husband and I were a prayer team. My husband was on the board. We worked in the nursery. My husband vacuumed every week. We did anything and everything that you can think of in service to our church. Yeah. So we were privy to a lot of the inner workings. And especially with my husband being on the board, we were very much aware of the shifts and changes that happened. We were a part of a major denomination. And then suddenly the idea was on the table that we should be independent. And so we went in that direction. So there was no governing authority, if you will, to answer to anymore. Sure. It was just the pastor and an advisory board and whatnot. But so there was a shift that way.
Yeah.
And then because that pastor had specifically come from corporate America before he became a pastor, it's very easy to fall into the same mindset.
How you think it works, right? I mean, that's how you run an organization, whatever.
And quite honestly, and I will say this with clarity, because he was a very good friend of mine. He was a control freak, and I know it because we used to joke about it, because I am too, and we used to say we were almost the same person. Just him. I like everything to be done the way I want it done, or I want to at least be in control of how it's happening. So I understood his personality, understood a lot of why, the mentality behind what he did. But it did become very much like this very hierarchical, mindset as to how everything should run. So I think there's a lot of that in a lot of churches, at least I've heard that now, where people are uncomfortable with the setup of the church, the function of the church, the how it's structured to work. And not so much on the outreach side. At least our church wasn't. We would try and do things, but it was all about getting people to be inside the church then, rather than how about if we just go out and meet them? And that was my big complaint. Why can't we go out and meet people where they are without any, I don't even know what's the word I want, without any, thought of trying to get them to do what we want them to do. An agenda. I didn't want to have an agenda. I just wanted to go take care of people. And that wasn't a part of how it's supposed to be done, apparently. So that's not met with a lot of, that's something maybe, you go do that on your own time, but not with church resources. So that was a very big sticking point for me. And I've heard from a lot of other people that was as well. So that goes back to what they were saying. And I read that book as well. Before I even went through this process, I had read that book. And if it's the same book I'm thinking of, because the one I read was a sociological experiment or subject matter, like a study.
Yeah, it was a sociological study. Yeah. I'm trying to think when it was. So it's quite late. I think it was about 2014, 2015, the one I'm thinking of.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. It's on my bookshelf.
In my head, 2015 is like 2 years ago. My brain. I'm like, that was
it's a little longer than you think.
What is happening to my life? It's just disappearing.
I know. I'm getting older so quickly, and I don't even know how that happened.
Well, at least you work out regularly. I'm not. So.
I don't know. It's that or not be able to move, apparently. So. Joking with my kids this morning. All my kids are grown, but my youngest son and his wife live with us at the moment. Okay. And it was their anniversary yesterday for 2 years. And I go, 2 years? How have you been married for 2 years? And my daughter-in-law laughed. She goes, "Oh, well, if you really want to feel it, I've known him for almost a decade." And I went,
yeah, no.
How old am I?
Well, you certainly don't look old enough to have kids that are grown, married. That's you're doing great. So
thank you. I'm 54, and I have my oldest is 31, so I'm definitely old enough. But thank you, I appreciate that.
So that's another factor that I find interesting as well is. Certainly in my experience, a lot of, because I've worked with churches throughout the world that are going through this process. Sometimes the leaderships are going through this process, but I've had relationship that's held over from before when I used to travel and speak all over the world in different churches and conferences and stuff. So I had a lot of relationships with church leaders and churches, and predominantly a lot of the narrative around it is, it's just millennials doing their thing. They'll grow up. We've always around that age, people leave church when they go to uni or something, and then they come back once they have kids, and that's the structure we know. And And it fascinates me, but that's not overly true. Like if you look at like the overwhelming spread of age, there's a massive spread of age that you're looking at. And actually, it does seem to be around the late 40s, 50s, seems to be a massive jump. It seems to actually kind of stagnate in between the kind of younger 20 odds and then kind of not really change. And then you hit the kind of late 40s, 50s, and it jumps up. I'm not sure what that is. You know, I've not managed to get any data on that yet. Hopefully.
Well, maybe it's that you're finally at a place in life where I hate to sound blithe about it, but maybe you're at a point in life where you're somewhat comfortable. You know, you've raised your kids. Now you actually have time to think.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm not just functioning to get through the day anymore. I actually have some time to think about it. So maybe that's part of it. I mean, that was true for me. It was after my kids that, 7 years ago. Yeah, right around the time that the youngest graduated high school, it was like, that's when all that started taking place. So maybe it is something to do with having time to finally look at life differently. And that is a different phase in life, because you do have those phases. Like you said, you have young adults or whatever that, like they said, we know people exit the church at this time, but they come back. But that is a thing. They're not coming back now, many of them.
No, they're
and
not.
We can't keep just saying millennials, because now you have Generation Z behind them and they're not going to church.
Dude, they're not even
a large majority of them. So you are seeing a great big evolutional shift in how people consider church and how it functions. And this is just my personal opinion, but I do believe that the greatest majority of the buildings are fading away. I just do. Because of the internet, because of this great questioning and awakening, it seems, that's happening, and kids that now want nothing to do with how Christianity looks.
Yeah.
Because I know for here, it looks very political, and I don't have any desire to be involved with that. That's not Christianity to me. And so you are seeing this big evolution, and I think we have to get really realistic about what it looks like going forward.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can continue to define it by a building and how many people put their butt in a seat every week. I just don't think that that's going to be doable going forward.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I've talked to church leaders, multiple church leaders. I've been a part of churches where I've sat down with them and said, hey, you're experiencing this mass hemorrhaging exodus of the church. You're asking me for my opinion. And I'm telling you the same thing that the people leaving are telling you. And it feels like you've got your head in the sand, because what they're saying is, we want to be able to be ourselves. We want to ask questions. We want to have discussions. We don't want to just be told a black and white answer and have to accept it at face value. We want some form of interactive elements to services. We want to be a part of this, but we want those things. And the amount of churches that have said, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on the people that want what we want. And then there are a huge group of people that need some safety, certainty, security, that are looking for some black and white models. But that group of people is slowly dying out. You know, if you look across, I'm quite a fan of different human development models. You know, it's just something like spiral dynamics, integral theory, or things like that. And if you look across the globe, we are slowly evolving. And as we evolve, the need for safety, certainty, and security, very much there in certain pockets around the world where they're still very much in that traditional stage. But most of the world has moved into modern. In America, the vast majority of people outside of a church, modern. Even the vast majority of people in church are modern. They just take a step back as soon as they open the doors on Sunday and go in. They just go back into an old mindset and way of thinking.
Let's have it.
But you look at somewhere like Europe, the majority of Europe, postmodern probably. Moving into an even later stage, and to desperately cling on to go, we'll just create a system that works for people that want to operate in that traditional stage. You're talking 2 whole stages prior. You know, you're talking a stage that hasn't been popular for 50, 60, 70 years in Europe. You're going to die.
It's going to die out. Yes. Because it's not self-sustaining.
It can't.
I read a study, and this has been several years ago now, but I read a study in which they were saying that pastors that was their vocation and they earned their living that way. If they were 50 or older, they were probably going to be okay going into retirement, expecting a salary. But pastors under the age of 50 had to start rethinking it because it was not going to be sustainable in the current model, because people were saying our resources need to be outside the building doing what we're supposed to be doing for those in need, not inside paying the rent and a new sound system or the pastor's salary. That's not what's important to us. So they had to start. So they should be bivocational. But a lot of pastors, and I brought that up in my church at one point, it does not go over well because this is their security. The pastor didn't like that. No, that's his security.
Well, that's how I feed my kids. It's how I'm going to pay for their college. I'm going to have to be able to retire. And I understand that as well. I understand the fear but it's reality on some level. But I also look at that and weigh it up.
But I also have a very big problem with the fact, where it's this way in America for sure, that we've put the title pastor in front of everybody that's involved in ministry, and that's erroneous, because a pastor is not a vocation, although we've treated it as one. Being a pastor is a heart issue. It's about you having a heart for people. It has nothing to do with you earning a living. Because I'm a pastor, I'm ordained. I don't use that title. I don't draw a salary from anybody or anywhere for that, but my heart is for people. I'll be the first one to stand in front of somebody that's being maligned or belittled. I'll be the first one to be there to help financially or however way I can help. But nobody's paying me to do that, because I think as soon as you start being paid to do something like that, it does kind of shift in your head.
It messes with things. Yeah,
it does. And so I really have a problem with too many people being called pastor. I don't care for that at all. And of course, that's not a popular opinion either. Started gathering a lot of unpopular opinions.
That seems to be the way it goes,
Oh, well,
and yet,
life.
Here you go. You probably find a very popular set of opinions you're sharing on this podcast, at least. I'm sure lots of people listening are going, yeah, preach it.
Well, good. I'll finally be in the mainstream.
You got some people, that's it. And you know what? You are becoming the mainstream, right? I mean, this is the fastest growing movement within Christianity in America and in the West. It's the fastest growing movement. There's no questions about that. And so it feels, and I think it's interesting to me that there is a need for, as much as I'm loath to use the term, I cringe every time someone calls me a pastor. But in another sense, I also understand that what I do day in, day out is I pastor people. I help people. I help them process their life and what's going on.
Like.
Right, and my dad was a pastor, and the thing is, we took no money from the church. They couldn't afford to pay us. He spent his whole life in hospitals, talking to kids that got pregnant, thinking about abortion, hanging out with people that were struggling, doing marriage advice, going around to old ladies and keeping them company because they were alone. He was a pastor, I mean,
because he cared about people.
Yeah,
that's what that's supposed to look like. And so, of course, there are people that are that way, and they do get paid. That's cool. I have no problems with that.
Yeah.
But I have a problem with people that are not that pastor at heart, that are still called that. And then because here's what happens. It's damaging. It's damaging to them. And it's damaging to the people that they are pastoring, because those people hearing the word pastor have a certain definition in their mind. So they have expectations that this person can't live up to because they're not equipped to. Yeah. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means that's not their forte. So it's damaging to those people because they can't understand why they can't get from that person what they need. Yeah. And then here's this person who, I have the title, I have the position. What do these people want from me? And there's this feeling of being attacked. So you have both of these sides that are in essence working against one another, all because of a perception of a word.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, has been a very big disadvantage for a lot of people as it pertains to understanding the term pastor.
Yeah.
So
it's a fascinating dynamic, because I do think when you look at this as an emerging movement that, the latest figures I've seen is about 2,700 people every day leaving the church in America.
Wow.
Huge amount of people. But
that's amazing.
78% say they still believe in God and want to pursue some level of spirituality. So the vast majority, over 2,000 of them going, yep, we're still wanting to pursue Jesus. It's not a falling away. It's an intentional move forward for them. It's maybe seen as falling away, might even be falling away. Maybe we're all going to hell. Who knows? Maybe. But it's intentional, and it's not a second, I'm done. It's this is the way I feel God leading me. And yet they have grown up in structures of relying on authority figures, some of whom are fantastic. Like my dad was a pastor, and he wasn't there to tell you what he believed. He would just hold your hand while you went to the abortion clinic. He would just sit with you. if that's where you're at, and my dad would be very against that, but he would do that.
But he would care about the person.
Because he cares, you know?
Right.
And so there's plenty of people out there that are doing that. They're sitting with people, they're grieving with people, they're laughing with people, they're, you know, comforting and bringing some life and joy to people's lives. And I think my dad's least favorite part was preaching, you know? But there's a need for people like that in this mass exodus. Because it's lonely, it's scary, we're going through grief, right? If we are grieving, we need people to grieve with. That's one of the most fundamental components of recovering from grief and processing and going through grief is community, and or at least having some people to sit with you, right? Just cry. If that's all you get, it's huge. And what's fascinating to me, this is why I made the shift. I used to work within the churches. I felt like an undercover agent. I was trying to get people out. Not quite the language I'd use, but you know, that's basically what like, come on, there's a better way. I'll lead you out. Go out the back door. But eventually I was like, gosh, I'm helping people within the church. Well, it doesn't look like the church needs any help getting people out. They're doing a really good job.
They're doing a really bang up job of it. Yeah.
And so that's not necessarily a model that's needed. And if you are content with the church, which I'm like, good for you. If you die content with the church 20 years from now, I'm so happy. Like, I don't need you to believe like me or change your belief. If this works for you, that's wonderful. But for the people that come out, it's this mass movement of let's say there's, you know, 1 million pastors in America. Probably not quite, but it feels like it sometimes.
Could be.
You know, they're all wanting to help people. How many of those million are sitting with this group of people, are siding with this group, are saying, hey, I'm with you. I don't even agree with you, but I'm on your side. I'm walking with you. The vast majority of them are sitting in these churches with people who need a safety, security, certainty, and giving them it. And I drew the line. I got to get out and help people on the other side. And I do wonder what that looks like, you know, because for the vast majority of people, this takes me like 60, 70 hours a week I spend doing this. And I'm lucky enough that just works. And I have people that donate to me and just help do that. But that's probably not a model that everyone can work on.
Probably not.
And it's fascinating to me how this is going to look as we start evolving and community, you know, support systems, people that leaders evolve regardless of what structures you build or how flat you try and build something. You put 20 people in a room and someone asks a question, we all turn and look at a certain person in the room because they're the most knowledgeable in that area, or it's about marriage and they've got the best marriage or whatever, you know?
Right.
It's intriguing to me. How do you see this kind of fleshing out over the next 20, 30 years? Because I mean, it's probably gonna look very different for different people as well.
Probably. I think that you're right, because it is such a large movement. I think that there has to be those people, and maybe this is where those that are truly called to be pastors step in, because now it doesn't become about doctrine. It doesn't become about tradition. It doesn't become about forcing somebody to believe the way we believe. It becomes about taking care of the person. And as you said, even in disagreement, being able to say, you're still valuable. Because I think, at least that was my experience, and I think it's probably been a lot of others, as soon as there was disagreement, you're dismissed. I grieved over the idea of people that I went to church with for years that I was there for when they needed something, that suddenly decided I wasn't worth their time anymore. That's a horrifying feeling. And so this movement, as you're saying, that many people leaving organized church buildings anyway, if not organized religion in totality, they need to know that there's a sense of community to work through that grief. Because again, many of them aren't going to realize that they're going through grief, first and foremost. But second of all, if they do, it's a lonely feeling.
Yeah.
And even in the midst of other people going through it, oftentimes you can still feel like, well, nobody still gets me. I feel that way all the time.
Yeah.
I'm also a very introverted person. I'm very empathic. So I tend to look at life very differently from everybody else anyway. So I just the other day was lamenting, like, God, I am my own little world. Like, nobody gets me. Which isn't true, but that's how you feel sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think there is a shift in how we have to look at community. I think that we have to say, look, church doesn't just happen on Sundays. Church is the people, and it happens wherever those people are, whenever those people are together. And we have to start looking at it differently. We also, and I believe this 100% because I've gone through it or still am going through it. And I was encouraged when you were explaining your podcast to me, the idea that you work with people that are atheistic or agnostic as well, because I believe that sometimes that's a stop on this journey. Or it may be a stopping point.
It might
for
be the
some
end
people
as well, but it's 100% a part of the journey.
But immediately that's demonized. Immediately, that is, you're apostate, you have fallen away from God. When in all actuality and in all honesty, my daughter just asked me the other day, Mom, do you believe in God? And I said, today, yes. Tomorrow, that may look different. I can't guarantee you anything because I no longer have that certainty in my mind. Yeah. As much as I hate that, I don't have it. Yeah. So we have to have an environment that is welcoming to people wherever they fall on that very large spectrum of deconstruction, and say, look, no matter where you fall, I get it, or somebody else gets it, they've been there, or it doesn't matter if I get it, I just care about you. Yeah. Because that's what people want. They want to know that they're cared for and that they're okay.
No, it's really good. I think it's interesting to me, and I'd be really interested to see how you think this kind of slots together, because one of the things that I've observed over time is how broad the spectrum of deconstruction is. Like you're saying,
for
you've got people that are agnostic, atheists, you've got people that have moved into different religions but still hold Jesus into that kind of component. Maybe they've moved to some Eastern stuff, maybe they're exploring maybe some Islamic stuff. I mean, really, like, they are like apostate to the conventional church, you know,
Very much
which of
so.
course is the best way to bring people back into your fold. You know, demonize them and hate them and push them away. That's a good way to bring them in.
Or threaten them with hell.
Yeah, well, that might work.
Scare them, that'll bring them back.
It's a big stick.
It is.
But one of the things that fascinates me, so I found this when one of the things that I did was I was getting all these messages from people going, do you know someone in LA? Do you know someone in Chicago? Do you know someone in London? And I was getting fed up trying to remember all the people I've talked to and trying to piece them together. So I made a website and I was like, okay, why don't you just put your name and your city in, and I'll put you on a map, and you can message people that are there, and it's great. That's part of what we're doing with our research. It's all kind of built into the same thing. And I was like, dude, I've sorted it. There we go. The loneliness in the deconstruction community, it's over. It'll be done in 5 minutes. Everyone will just log in, sign up, message people. There'll be, you know, little house churches, or if that's not your thing, there'll be pub gatherings. There'll be people hanging out in the homes. It'll be great. In 3 weeks, the whole thing will be sorted. Not quite, but, you know, in my naivety, I did think, gosh, this will be amazing. And, you know, I see like a good example is I think in LA, there's like 40 odd people already. And you're like, whoa, these guys they're going to be sorted to have some people that they can connect with. I know LA is a big place, but
it is
45-minute drive, hour drive is worth it, you know. At this point, most people are willing to drive 5 hours to have something. But what was fascinating is I had this young woman message me, and she says, hey, Phil, I'm about a year into my deconstruction, and I've logged into your website, and I've messaged every person in LA, and I've talked to them a bit, and I just can't find anyone that believes like I do. And I was like, huh, interesting. and if I'd thought about this a bit more intentionally, I'd be like, of course that's going to happen, because there's a lot of people on this spectrum that are still going, yeah, but this is what deconstruction is, and this is what faith is now, and I'm right, and I figured it out. It's still part of that very dualist. I think what you're describing is I don't know what word to use that doesn't sound elitist or whatever, but it's a different plane. It's transcended the extremes of dualism. I think it's probably still within the world of dualism, unfortunately. I don't know how much we can escape that, but it has stepped beyond some of that dualism and gone, well, actually, who cares, right? What cares is the person. We can connect, and the beliefs, they'll flesh out in time, and we'll just all go on our unique journeys and see what it looks like. But a good percentage of this community are still going, yeah, but it's gotta look like that. It's gotta look like this. I spoke to a guy the other week, and he's like, oh, well, obviously it would have worship. And I'm like, God, kill me now. Put a gun in my mouth and pull it. Like,
that's enough.
I am a hard no. I am not a part of this community anymore. So I don't want to be friends with any of you ever again. No,
well, because our music even has doctrine involved. So you have to dissect your music.
I'm like, I'm out. I can't sit in a circle with people singing Kumbaya or whatever.
Yeah, it's not the same anymore.
I can't. Or you talk to someone else and they're like, well, obviously we would pray together. And I'm like, what's that going to look like? Do you have any idea how broad that spectrum is for people? And so many people, their concept of what God is can't even be prayed to. You know, they might contemplate, they might meditate, they might, you know, find and center and find God within, but they're not going to pray to an old guy in the sky, your prayer list every week. Or so how do you see, do you almost see that they're in earlier stage? I don't know if that's an early stage, or I don't know if that's just, I don't know how to describe it. In that stage of deconstruction, do you see it kind of splintering into different communities that are quite black and white still?
I think that almost happens without any way of controlling it. Like you said, we tend to be very dualistic. We tend to be very tribal. So we're looking for people that are like us. But then, like you said, and it's funny, you're the first person I've heard that uses the same word as me, spectrum, because I think everything is on a spectrum, and this experience definitely is. But as I said a little bit ago, I alluded to anyway, some people are deconstructing maybe whether they believe in hell or not, or is the Bible infallible. That's the extent of their deconstruction. And I'm not dismissing any of these, by the way. They're all important. But then you have people that go a little further and they're like, well, I need to question why God is the way he is. Why is God allowed to be violent, but I'm not? Why is God allowed to not forgive his enemies and send them to hell, but I'm supposed to forgive mine 70 times 7? There's all these different, so suddenly now you're deconstructing your vision of God. Then you go even further and we find those people that are now saying, I don't even know if I believe in God anymore. Does it make sense as a construct? But then you even go even further and you're like, now I have to reevaluate me because my entire identity is wrapped up in this label called Christian. So if I am starting to dissect what all of that means, who am I? I don't have an identity anymore. And so you have this very wide spectrum. So you're going to have people that are very comfortable here, people that are very uncomfortable and angry or hurt over here. I don't know how you can do it to where, as you said, somebody can call 40 different people and find somebody that's like them. That means there's 40 different types of people on the spectrum somewhere. How do you identify? There has to be almost a pie in the sky idea of it. Like at some point we have to all just get past our questions and say, I get it. You're questioning different things than me, but I still accept you. We have to get above that somehow. And I don't know, the first word that comes to mind for me in that is kingdom. Maybe that's what the kingdom is supposed to look like, is that idea of community regardless of difference. I think it sounds like a Beatles song or something.
I like it.
But honestly, it sounds very pie in the sky because that's not our experience on a normal basis. That's what we're expecting when we get to heaven. Someday it'll be like that. Well, what if that someday doesn't exist? What if that is the here and the now and you're supposed to be living that way right now? And you're blowing it off and making it unimportant because it doesn't fit your parameters for here and the now. I don't know. I think these are really hard questions.
How was it for in your deconstruction? How did you navigate this, trying to find community, all these different elements? Like, what did that look like for you?
Well, as I said, I'm very introverted. So not having to go to lunch with people was totally okay with me. I was always very uncomfortable in those circumstances. I wasn't, and I've never been have a girlfriend go to lunch, shop together. I'm not that kind of girl either. So that part was a little easier for me. Although I will say the first Sunday I wasn't in church, I couldn't sit still. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was used to being very, very, very busy. And I suddenly wasn't anymore. And so I started hiking. Actually, every Sunday I would go hike, very, very long hikes. And I ended up with some friends that ended up hiking with me, and we would talk through all these things together. So that was part of my process with community and how to handle that, is I had those one or two people that were on a similar road. And we would work through that. I also, as I said, because I couldn't get answers that I wanted, I started doing a lot of reading and a lot of studying. I found relationships with a lot of people in social media. I joined book reading groups. I was okay with exploring any idea that was out there that I wouldn't have previously allowed myself to explore. And I found a lot of value in that. So along the way, you found those relationships, Now, some of them have come and some of them have gone. And I have maybe different relationships now. But it's all been through this evolution of this, deconstructive process. Like, where am I at? I usually will come into contact with people that are pretty close to the same, where they are on that timeline as I am. And I think that is actually life, if we're honest. Some relationships come and some relationships go. And they change based on where we are in life. So maybe if we approach this process in the same way, we will find that community. It just isn't going to look the way we think it should, maybe.
Do you think then maybe, in a sense, having church communities built around believing specific things, or we all agree, in some ways are very much tailored to stagnate growth? Because if I change, well, I'm going to have to find new people. Do you know what I mean? That's I've not thought of that as much.
It makes sense. I mean, if you are of a certain belief, you don't usually step outside of that belief. And so, yes, those relationships do become very stagnant. I even joked about that. I've wrote about that as well before, the idea that having friendships that are built around your church attendance are lazy. It's a lazy relationship because it's basically built on the fact that you're both going to be in the same building at the same day every week. It's convenient, exactly. But outside of that way of living, you have to work very hard to maintain those relationships. You have to actually put yourself out there, and
especially if you're introverted.
It just doesn't just happen. Yeah, and if you're introverted, it's really a difficult process.
Oh yeah, it's been like 3 weeks since I saw one. I guess I
should probably let somebody know where I am.
Yeah.
I'm married and I have kids.
Check you're not dead.
So most people knew where I was, but yeah, I mean, I could spend a few weeks by myself and nobody would hear from me. I'd be totally fine. So yeah, it does, but it becomes much more difficult, to seek out those relationships and to build on them. Like I said, I'm not somebody that likes to go out to lunch, but you know what? You want to go hike with me? I'll sit and get dirty with you all day. That's cool. And we'll have some really good relationship bonding conversations. We'll talk about God. I mean, the ladies that I used to hike with, they told me, this is church for me now. This is it. And one of them had no belief in God or Jesus at all. She's like, I don't want anything to do with Christians, but she would talk with me, and she would ask me questions. And she actually told me at one point, you are one of only 2 people that I will have these kind of conversations with, because I don't like anybody else that identifies that way.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I'm very honored by that, but I mean, that's sad. It's a very sad commentary.
Crushing. Yeah. It's very indicative of who Christianity are publicly to most people.
Well, it kind of shocked me because she actually spent a lot of time with me in my really, really angry phase. So she got a lot of the, I don't like God right now. I think he's kind of an ass. I really went through, my very, very angry phase. And so she was on the front line for that. So I was very impressed that she still wanted to have any kind of conversation about God at all. So, but you never know what's going to work for somebody.
You don't. Let's go back to grief, because I feel like this is a fascinating world that this is your expertise, right? This is what you're studying or looking at. This is what you are immersing your world in a little bit.
My area of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. An area of interest is a beautiful area to be an expert in, though, really. So for you said this has fleshed out a lot of anger, a lot of those kind of early stages of grief. Talk to me about what your doctorate thesis is generally speaking, or can you go into that a bit, or is that
this was my doctoral thesis. I don't know that it still will be, because like I said, it might, and I had an advisor already that said she was very interested in it, though. She actually offered to be my chair for me when I get to that point. She said, I think this is a great conversation. I think this is a great place for you to go, but you're going to have to narrow it down. So again, I'll have to work on that. So, but as it pertains to what I've written about already and what I talk about often with people, grief it's difficult. And I know that makes it seem such a, weird little way of saying it. I don't know that that's strong enough but then grief is subjective.
Yeah.
It hits each person differently, which is why it really worked for me in the subject matter. As I was thinking about it from a dissertation view, is deconstruction is very subjective. Each one of us will experience that differently. So it makes sense to me that the two go together, because they both have so many elements or emotions that go together. And one of the things that I did write about in the book is, and I'm a very snarky person, so I wrote about it kind of from a snarky position, but I've come across people who are all bubbly and light, and they're like, one day I just woke up and God was a good God, and I don't know, I just can't go back to living. And yes, no, I don't hate them, but they annoy me. They annoy me because that was not my experience. those people are going to grieve very differently. And I liken that to the idea of, if I have a grandparent who I've had a beautiful relationship with my entire life, and they grow to a very old age and they pass away peacefully, I'm going to grieve that person, but it's not going to be with very much anger. There might be some anger, but it's going to be a very different grief than it would be if a loved one were murdered or killed in an auto accident, and I had to wrestle with the ramifications of life without that person. That would be a very different grief.
Absolutely.
So however you enter this process of deconstruction is going to play heavily into how you grieve through this process. And so, like I said, some people wake up and God is a good God all of a sudden, and they don't understand what all the hullabaloo is about. And maybe you should just stop being bitter and angry, as though I can just turn that off. And I think that's why I find that annoying, because you tend to hear that from people that have that very sunny disposition. Well, I just don't understand. Why do you have to be angry? Well, I don't know. Why aren't you?
It's so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. So again, everybody's going to go through this very differently. And so that was my contention, that's why I was able to apply it to a grief cycle, because it made sense. The grieving was different. The deconstruction was different. It was specific to the person and their many varied experiences and how they got there. So it's such a big picture. It's almost indescribable.
Yeah.
And that's another reason I think people have a very hard time finding one another, is because they're so locked into their own little process that's happening and what they're experiencing that it's hard to connect with somebody that isn't experiencing that exact same thing. If I'm a happy-go-lucky person in my deconstruction and that person's angry, I'm probably not going to want to spend time with them.
No, sure. That makes sense.
And if I'm angry, I don't need Miss Mary Sunshine over here trying to tell me life's okay when it doesn't feel like it is.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's such a very
tell me a bit about grief, because I have very little understanding of grief as it's perceived today. But I know, like the old model, and it might be still the current model, was very much your 5 stages of grief, and you can't really skip them. You've got to go through them to some degree. Is that still largely held, or?
I mean, the 5 cycles of grief, yes, that's still definitely the definition of the grieving process.
Sure.
I think it's a mistake, though, to look at that as though it's on some linear progression.
Right.
You don't hit each one of those in order and for a specific period of time, and then suddenly you're at nirvana or acceptance and life goes on. It doesn't work that way. And that's one of the things that I think has been very difficult in this process for me, is I have worked through a lot of anger and depression over a lot of things. And then out of nowhere, it'll show up again. And I'll think, I've already dealt with this. Well, I have, but now I have to deal with it from the new perspective I have on it. And that's going to be a continual thing. So I think that a lot of people feel that way. I have come across people that are very set on their ideas of grief. For example, if they know somebody that has had a spouse die or something, or a family member, there's this deep sympathy for them for a long time. And then suddenly there's almost an annoyance, like, why aren't you done with this yet?
Yeah.
As though it can be planned out and put on the calendar. Okay, today's the lucky day, I'm done. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to be very patient with ourselves and with others as we're going through this, because on any given day, they may be in the middle of bargaining again, or maybe now they're in depression, or suddenly they're angry. Even after we've hit the almighty acceptance, we're still going to visit those again.
Yeah.
Based on things that happen. And I don't like the word trigger, but that's pretty much the only word that most people recognize.
Yeah. So but like a birthday comes around, something, you see that thing, or you smell that smell, or whatever, and you go, oh, it makes you think of this person, and you're like, wait, why?
All over again.
All sorts of things,
all over again. And the same applies to this process. So the grief process is still pretty much what it's always been, defined as. But I think the problem has been the perception that most people have had of it. Like, it's a very organized, ordered process, and that's not true. It's messy. Yeah. And it's ugly, and it's emotional, and
Yeah. So how do you even go about framing how to look at this and how to tackle it? Like, because it does feel like such a broad world.
Well, in the book I wrote, I talked a lot about a lot of different psychological processes that go into how we change our mind. The reasons that we do, maybe the reasons that we didn't for a long time. But when I got to grief, I was kind of stuck there as well from that perspective. Like, how do you discuss this?
Yeah, where do you even begin?
So it was something that at the beginning I discussed grief in a very macro way. This is this is the research, this is the studies on grief, this is the definitions and everything. But as it got into the individual tenets of the cycle itself, I tended to go back to stories that people had told me, right, and use their words as examples of how they felt in that moment. I have a lot of writing of myself over the last 7 years, and I actually pulled a lot of that, oh, this fits here. I remember this, it goes here. And so I didn't really define each one of those stages per se. I might have given a little overview over it, but I didn't try to say, okay, this is how you feel in this stage, because that's not my place. No. I tried to give examples of people that were in those phases and what they were experiencing. That makes sense. So like I said, more anecdotal than definitely not scholarly. Yeah. Not a study related thing at all. This is more experience related.
Yeah. So. Or it's certainly at least more qualitative than quantitative, right, at least.
Right. Yeah.
Because that might be some sort of level of approach for a lot of people is, oh crap, we're gonna have to look at this qualitatively because it's just too, how do you broad. Put numbers on this?
Yes. And I don't know that you can, because even if somebody can identify and say, I spent the majority of my time in the anger phase of grief. Well, what does their anger look like? Now we have to start deconstructing terms, which of course is the original definition of deconstruction. It's about unity of text. How do we define what we're saying so that everybody understands it from the same perspective? I don't know that we can. We try to use language. What was his name? His name just went out of my head. The gentleman that coined the term deconstruction, the original, anyway. It'll come to me later, I'm positive. Okay. But he even said, this is about unity of text, but we use certain terms that we use because they're the best terms that we have in the moment. Yeah. We don't have another term. So as we're talking about this, I may be feeling anger, but my anger may be different than yours, but it's the only word I have to describe what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
So the problem with that, though, is when you hear the word anger, you're going to understand it from your perspective, not mine. So it may just be off a little bit. So there is no way to line this up 100%.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of being so individual, each person being so individual and unique. So we can really only explain experiences. We can't really, quantify, you fit in this box and you fit. We can't do that. And I think, unfortunately, too many of us are trying to do that. And I think that's probably one of the things that frustrates me about the whole idea of reconstructing is by whose terms?
Yeah. Well, this is it. At some point, someone has to, again, within their own world of dualism, go, oh, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad.
Yes.
We're moralizing, we're drawing ethical lines or whatever it might be. And it becomes problematic. And maybe if you look at someone that loses a family member, maybe they have, I have a very close person to me that lost someone. We both mutually lost someone. And I processed that so healthily, but relatively, I'm okay. I really am. Like, I've gone through that, and I'm like, yeah. And actually, I can think about that. I can think about that time, watching the person die, and think fondly of that time, and actually find it as a very beautiful experience in my memory and whatever. The other person has full blown PTSD over it, and it was largely down to they had come from a charismatic background. They had everyone, they were praying for healing and it was going to happen. Right. And right to the last moment, we'd for the last 2 months been told by the doctor, all right, she's got like 5 weeks. Okay. She's got 3 weeks. Okay. It's tomorrow. Like, we knew this was coming. We come to terms with this person hadn't been able to. So on some level, society then looks at someone that's got some sort of like trauma, whatever, and goes, okay, that's bad. Most of us would go, that's not a good thing to have to suffer or experience. Right. I would take a step back and go, but anyway, but no one signs up for it,
Right.
And so we decide, okay, so that's not good. So we'll walk you through therapy or whatever. We'll try and get you through your PTSD so that, and ultimately through this grief to be in a healthy place, just like Phil, right? Because I'm in such a healthy place. And of course, I'm still going to have my waves that hit me every now and again. And sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower, and they'll come more frequently or less frequently, but I'll still be hit with grief. That's how it works. But it does feel on some level that in society, we can look at someone that's lost a loved one or something like that and go, oh, that feels unhealthy. That feels healthy. We still do that to some degree, but I guess because it's more of a baseline model across the board, some of these things are quite is the death of a loved one ever simple? But you understand what I'm saying, in that like we all do this. It happens to everyone. We know what it is like for a child to lose their parent on some level. We can kind of go, okay, these are some of the things they go through, and this is how they often deal with it, and that's how.
Yeah, there's a lot of the same markers. Yeah.
But when you look at something like deconstruction, and you're going, oh, this person has redefined their version of hell. They got kicked out by their church, but they joined a progressive church, and that's okay. Or they started a house church where they're really angry about their last church, but they've got a few friends and they all get together and get angry, or whatever, right? But it's a small loss. It's
seen all of those.
And then you get someone that's like, oh my gosh, they've deconstructed. They don't even have a God anymore. They are like you're saying, they're now, their ego, right? That brain that's keeping you safe is now going, oh shit, what did I open?
Right.
This Pandora box, because now I'm under fire. Now I might be the problem, right? And so now we're starting to question our ego. Who are we? What even am I? Like, that's terrifying. These are like such different experiences. And yet grief is subjective, and it's like, the child that falls over and bangs its knee is the worst pain it's ever experienced. That's just as bad as me getting shot, maybe, perhaps, in how I perceive pain.
It's perspective.
So I guess I'm fascinated by this world of such a broad spectrum.
Yeah. And frightened by it, to be honest. I am anyway.
But on some
because
level,
I don't know how am I going to react, or how do I deal with each person, because I don't know that I can completely understand.
Yeah.
I don't know. That frightens me on some level, because I want to be that kind of person that's there for other people, but I don't know that I can ever be that completely.
Yeah.
Not without insinuating that maybe something I know is what they should know. And that's not right.
No, exactly. Which is, you're stepping into, I'm the reconstructing person. Let me reconstruct for you.
Yes.
Which, let's be honest, the reason most of our deconstruct is because we were told what to believe, right? So I don't dare come here. That's one of the number one problems with people that want to reconstruct, is they're going, hey, I'm happy to be a new person in your life that will tell you what to believe.
Yes.
But I guess my point is, it feels like, from externally observing this world of grief and how people perceive it, that there's at least some level of, we go, okay, we don't define the timeline, we don't define what it looks like for you, but we do on some level as a society go, you can get through this, and you should on some level come to a place on the other side where it's healthy, it's wholesome, and even your grief is actually almost a positive thing now, as opposed to a negative, or whatever that looks like.
Right.
Is that the case? Is that what people observe, like maybe from a more a therapy background or things? Is that actually how we look? We do go, no, well, people hopefully will get through this. And if so, either yes or no, are we being presumptuous looking at people that are deconstructing going, you should get through this? Or should we be looking at it going, yeah, okay, it's fine to be angry, it's fine to be in denial, it's fine to be all these things, but there should be a roadmap for you. There should be ways for us to help you move and navigate through these things, right? If you're angry, it's probably rooted in some pain. Let me talk to you about how your pastor rejected you, and let's process some of it. Like that feels on some level, maybe it is a good thing, right? As dualistic as that is. Like,
I mean, I get it. I think that the intent is good. I think maybe it gets lost in the translation. And what I mean by that is, do I think that people should come to a place where they're comfortable living again? Yes, I do. However, it's not my place to tell them what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I think I've read probably 3 different books in the last couple of weeks on a reconstructive process. I just got another one today. I haven't read it yet. And I struggle with them when I read them, because it almost comes off as a task list.
Yeah.
Just do these things, just do these things. And then you'll look the way I think you should look. That's how it comes across to me. But that's not my place. My place, even if I'm talking from the position of being a therapist, or I'm a life coach as well. If I'm talking about from that perspective, my job is to not fix you. That's not my job. My job is to provide the space for you to work through what you need to work through, and to provide support for that. So if we're talking about deconstruction, and I asked somebody this the other day, I said, why is it that we delineate between the two? Deconstruction, reconstruction. What if my deconstruction results in my reconstruction? And what I mean by that is, what if I get to the end of asking all my questions and I go, this is where I need to be? And it doesn't look anything like I've built something again, or I've constructed a new belief system. What if this is just where I am and I'm happy there?
Yeah.
The problem is, other people aren't going to understand that. And so they want to impose their thoughts or their will on that process. But that's not your right.
Yeah.
If you're truly being something for that person, if you're being a support system, or God forbid you're being a therapist, it's not your job to make sure that they have reached a point where you think they're better. It's your job to provide the space so they reach a point where they think they're better.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this comes down to as well. I have struggled through a lot of emotional upheaval through this entire process. I went through PTSD, a period of PTSD-like behavior. I had generalized anxiety up the yin-yang, and I still do. I dealt with depression long before this, and that just was exacerbated through this process. Terrible fits of anger, all kinds of stuff that happened during this. I finally am at a place where the majority of the time I feel okay.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to come along and say, okay, well, now you have to decide what you believe about God. I don't want to talk about what I believe about God, because right now I'm not sure God is there. And that's where I am right now. But I will say this, I'm going to leave it open to say, and I may change my mind.
Sure.
Because more than likely I will.
Yeah.
And it's a tough subject. Like I mentioned earlier, I talked to my daughter about this the other day, because my daughter, of course, went through a very similar process to mine, and she's half my age. And we were going through it and talking about, she called me and she's very upset about something, and we were talking it through. And that's when she asked me, do you believe in God? And I said, do you? And she said, no. Well, as a mother, especially from my Christian background, I was like, oh, that momentary sense of panic. And then I thought, no, this is her process. And I said, okay, honey, that's fine. She goes, I don't think I'll ever believe in God again. I said, yeah, I can see how it feels like that. I said, but what I would suggest to you is be open to the fact that you can change your mind, and that's okay. And she said, things are starting to feel more normal, because they do after a while. But that timeline, I never thought 7 years. If somebody had told me 7 years when I first started going through this, I just shot myself. Skip it. I don't need 7 years of this crap. But looking back, there's been a lot of value in that entire process, but it doesn't feel like it all the way through. So to tell somebody else when their journey is over, or how the end of their journey should look, that's pretty egotistical, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I don't think there's not value in those books on Reconstruction. I do think there's probably valuable things there. I just think that when you begin to set an expectation that everybody should reconstruct to the point where you are now once again religious.
Yeah.
That's what that is. It's religious.
Absolutely.
And I know that's a good default for a lot of people, because that's what we're used to. But I don't know that that's the healthiest default.
No, I just had so I'm sorry, I've got something in my eye and it is itching like crazy. But I just had 2 people recently on the podcast that are fascinating people who focus on Reconstruction in some ways. And one of them was Keith Giles.
I know Keith. He's a very good friend.
Yeah, he's great. I had nothing about him. We've been probably friends on Facebook for forever, but I never see his stuff. I don't know. I don't know how that works. That's because I don't go on Facebook. But I knew nothing about him going in, and we ended up talking for like 3 hours. And I was like, gosh, I could keep going.
He's a good guy.
Like a marathon. But one of the things I grilled him hard about was his program of Reconstruction. He's got like a Reconstruction course, and I was I'm going to grill you, because I don't believe in this. I do believe that we are constantly rebuilding as we deconstruct. It's just how we do things, right? I mean, even if you tear down the house and go, oh shoot, I need somewhere to sleep, I'll put a tent up. That's in some way, shape, or form some form of construction to go into.
True.
You might go, I'm probably not going to keep the tent. I think I'll build something else. That might come down tomorrow. But it's some form, right? We're constantly building as we deconstruct and changing. And most beliefs that we throw out are temporarily at least replaced with some other beliefs. So, but the big thing I wanted to grill him on was how prescriptive are you? Like, and I think that was it was really interesting hearing his perspective on how he does things, how he tries not to be prescriptive, and what that looks like. The other person I just had was a therapist, Mark Karras. He's got a book.
I know Mark. I just got his book today.
Oh, yeah, really? Okay, yeah. He gave me an advance copy like a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, dude, I want to get this guy on the podcast. And so I managed to kind of condense the book into 3 hours for people. Send
it to me. He literally just sent me a message today. Do you want a copy of my book? And I was like, yes. So he sent me a PDF copy of it today.
And again, I had never heard of Mark. I am just really bad at knowing who's
we have the same publisher. That's how I know we're all in the same publisher. So.
Yeah, there you go. But again, I was like, oh, I like how he's not too prescriptive. My wording of my endorsement was very careful. It was, this is the best book I've come across so far on this topic of how to reconstruct. But I still grilled him like crazy. I'm like, okay, how do you go? Because you do still go, and you're trying to avoid theological topics in your reconstruction. And and gosh, thank you.
Yes, for
you're
sure.
Still going, okay, to reconstruct, you should focus on this component of your mental health, this component of, you know, your identity, maybe some of this about your relationships. Like, and I'm like, I would largely agree. Those are all very good metrics for lifestyle, quality of life, internal happiness. But on some level, you're still being very prescriptive, right? There's still this danger.
I don't know that we can avoid that.
It's such a fascinating dynamic because we want to help people, right? And you do
want
to help people.
Yes.
But it's and then when you've got such a broad thing, how do you avoid being prescriptive? But it's fascinating that, you know, like you keep coming across these people that are going, I want to help people reconstruct. I'm not allowed to be prescriptive. How do I do that? Like, it fascinates me.
I don't know that you can.
I just avoid it.
As soon as you bring up the subject matter, you are suggesting that there is a process.
Yeah.
Immediately. And I don't know how you get around that. Yeah, I know both of them very well. I think you just talked. Awesome. I think you just talked with another friend of mine too, Matthew DiStefano.
Oh yeah, I talked to him a while back. Yeah.
He's like one of my very best friends.
Oh, awesome.
We're actually writing a book together right now. So
he is prolific. He just bashes them out.
He's awesome. Well, yeah, and I and Keith both. I'm constantly like, you guys are freaking overachievers. You're making the rest of us feel bad.
I can't be bothered. I spend my whole life talking with people day in, day out, and the last thing I want to do when I stop is go, oh, I'll write a book. Like, I want to go hang out my wife for.
That's what's really cool about the book Matt and I are writing. We're doing it just like this. We're having Skype sessions, and it's a conversation, and then he's transcribing, and I'm like, this is the way you write a book.
That does sound good.
This is it.
Yeah. Conversational books. I do like Ken Wilber writes a lot of his books like that.
Yeah.
And what was it? Power of Myth was a great book.
Yes.
It was done conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It works.
I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but I really liked the process. But he and I are spending a lot of time because we're actually working and talking through his deconstruction.
Right.
And so that's what the whole conversation is about. So so he and I have been having a lot of conversations lately about the whole idea of reconstruction. So he knows kind of how I feel about that as well. And it, you know, like I said, as soon as you use the word, I think that you've set up the premise that there is a process to that as well.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be very careful. I don't think that's avoidable, but I think we have to be very careful that we don't have expectations for what somebody else's reconstruction looks like or where it should end.
Yeah.
It shouldn't look just like ours.
Yeah.
It just
how do you go about defining deconstruction? Because this is something, in fact, because my website is like it's the Deconstruction Network. I picked a name because I don't really even care about the word deconstruction. I'm like, whatever, you call yourself a nomad, a deconstruction,
it's become
refugee,
so passé now.
None. I don't care. But like whatever, if you feel like you're going through something, a knee community, that's all I care about, right? And if you're going through whatever that looks like, I'd love to do research on you. Basically, I'm like, please come be a guinea pig.
Exactly.
But one of the things my researchers in England are hitting me over and over about is like, dude, you've got to define deconstruction. I'm like, that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the research, though. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's a chicken and egg scenario in a sense, because this is such a vague world. It's such a broad spectrum. How do I define it? So I'm intrigued. How do you define that when people go, well, what's someone deconstructing, or what is deconstruction? What do you respond?
I think I'm kind of with you. I'm not sure how you define that, because as I said, I mean, going back to the original definition of that word, it's about how we understand language. And so this has become a word that has become synonymous with some religious process. And that's not true, because you don't have to be religious at all to deconstruct something.
Yeah.
A lot of us are deconstructing politics, you know, or whatever. We're changing. And basically, I think it comes down to, if I had words that they would be, I think the best words I could use were the process of changing your mind. And that's kind of where I centered in what I wrote, because there's so much of a psychological process that keeps us from changing our mind, that suggests how we should change our mind, and then what eventually allows us to change our minds. That I think that becomes, to me, the broadest definition of deconstruction is the process of changing my mind.
Yeah. But that is a huge, I mean, there's no human on the planet that isn't doing that on some level, almost by the microsecond.
Right.
Not quite, but like, you know, we're constantly filtering in and slowly shifting in our beliefs or ideas and concepts. And so it does become very complex, because obviously for example, say my network, say I go, okay, so everyone that's changing your mind, come on and join. Good God, are you going to find it hard in LA now? You know, like it's going to be a real hellhole for now.
Right. So you have to get smaller in your questions.
Right. Then, so you have to then niche it down even more.
You have to go, okay, everybody that's deconstructing their ideas of hell, meet here. Everybody that's deconstructing their idea of Jesus, meet here.
So
it's
at least on a spiritual, at least deconstruction spiritually, or and then it's to what degree, and you've got those dynamics as well. Because apart from my wife's grandmother, I once talked to her. I think she's about 78 or so, and I was like, so she asked me what I did, and I was like, oh, she is very conservative, very conventional Christian. And I was like, how do I was like, you know how like in your life when you grow, you change your mind about God. He shows up and he's just better than you thought, and you have to change your mind or something like that. And she's like, no, God's exactly the same as the day I got saved when I was 14.
God does not change. He's immutable.
Interesting. I'm like, but we change, right? And she's like, not in this. And I'm like, all right. I just moved quickly on, I'm like, bail on this one hard. But what's interesting is most people recognize that's not the case. And most people would say that their faith has changed and evolved. And yet again, a lot of these people are still very far from being in a place where they want to be around. It's a bit like a more extreme version of what I'm saying of like, well, if you just change your view on hell, you might still really want to be around some black and white people. You just might want something a bit more progressive. Maybe like something like the progressive church is a good example of what I would call like tiptoeing into progression, into deconstruction in a sense, because it's like, well, we're not happy with homophobia and like how minorities are treated, slavery, racism, probably more applicable in the US, hell, whatever, but we're still very kind of black and white. There is a God, and and so like that's fine, but there's people that aren't even there, and so like, you've got all these different elements, and it does really fascinate. I'm just constantly trying to please my researchers, going, I don't know how to define this for you.
Well, again, because now think of it on this level. It sounds as though, and I may be wrong, but it sounds as though your researchers are looking for certainty as well. Yeah. In a process where there isn't any certainty. And unfortunately, and you said something a minute ago that spurred that thought. I think for many people, we've been raised on the idea that our faith means we're certain.
Yeah.
And we've equated the two terms as though they're synonymous, and they're not. Yeah. Faith is about mystery. Faith is about the unknown. And the opposite of faith is certainty. They are 100% opposite of one another. And we always have this belief that the opposite of faith is doubt. It's not true. Yeah. Doubt is included in faith because there's that element of the unknown.
It's a key component in some ways.
Yes. So in trying to do research, what you're trying to do is come to a conclusion, which is asking for some measure of certainty.
Oh, I am a data person. I'm so excited, but I'm going to be sorely disappointed, I know.
More than likely. Yeah. Because the reality is we can't be 100% certain about any of this. I mean, that's science in general. That's why science is always changing, because it's a constant what-if scenario.
Yeah.
And let's play it out to see if it works or not. Oh, it didn't work, so now let's have a new what-if. Yeah. So again, this is all, I mean, I think this is something people have done for a long, long time. I think what you're seeing right now is so many people are doing it very broadly, and it's much more open. And so now we've ascribed a term to it. And so now, because we are very dualistic in our minds, we have to have it defined well for us, instead of saying this is some nebulous process that we just go through and I don't know what happens at the end of it.
Yeah. That's what I'm hoping to do in the research is for me, I think it's too black and white, it's too written off, it's too defined by the wrong people. Right. And what I want to do is go, look, like we just put out one of our first pieces of data the other day, and it was talking about church attendance. And I was like, look, 24% of people that are deconstructing are in church right now.
Wow. Okay. That's good to know.
And you go, so they're not de-churched. There's a lot of them are, but they're not necessarily. Right. So just and we've not gone into that. That's a whole nother level of like, what does that look like? But it's just like, this isn't what you think, so the narrative is, oh, deconstruction, they're just looking for an excuse not to go to church. They're just backsliding. They just don't care about church, or they don't like church, or they're angry at church. And it's like, not a good portion of
not all of them.
Apparently. Now, who knows, maybe 24% of that population are in church and they all hate church. I don't know. I'm not asked that. But we'll look at that when the bridge crosses. But my goal was to kind of like try and debunk some of these kind of myths, these kind of like throwaway dismissals, you know, like, oh, they never really believed it anyway. And it's like, you are aware that it's actually the most involved and the most spiritually mature in the church that deconstruct.
That's right. Yes.
I'd love to get more clear-cut data on that, but it's fairly evident from the little that we have kind of like out there.
Well, I think church refugees made that contention as well.
Hugely, right?
That it was the ones that were most involved. Yes, that are suddenly making this shift. Which was fascinating, in all honesty. But
because
I understood it.
Have that narrative. If not, if we haven't observed it ourselves, we've at least heard it over and over and over from within this church. And then when we leave, we're hearing it about ourselves, and maybe we're starting to doubt ourselves. So, I'm intrigued. So you mentioned some PTSD components to grief potentially. What do you think of religious trauma syndrome? You know, Marlene Winnell's kind of component of PTSD?
I think it's very valid. A lot of people, of course, depending upon the kind of abuse that you're talking about or the trauma involved, are going to, that again is something else that's subjective in its definition, because as I said, some people, trauma is being yelled at by the pastor, and for others it's being, molested and by a Roman priest. I mean, it's very large spectrum there as well. Yeah, more spectrum. Yeah. I think that there is a validity to that, though, for sure, because it is having a trauma effect on people based on something that happened to them within this religious construct. And I mean, we could probably identify other constructs in which there's some kind of trauma associated, but this one is specific to a place where you're supposed to be able to find healing and God and love and all of these things. And of course, and I'm sure you know this right now, the DSM doesn't have any correlation to religious abuse at the moment. I hope they change that. I would love to be able to help change that, because I think it's so very real. The closest that they come in the DSM is complex PTSD, because it's trauma that is occurring repeatedly, and it's creating this trauma effect, or this abusive effect in people, and they're acting out from it emotionally. And that's then, so when you see this acting out, so let's go back to an example of maybe a child that's being sexually molested. Not necessarily in church, but I just mean in general.
Sure, in general.
Right. There's a period where you're going to see certain behavior from that child. That's going to be a clue. You may not know exactly what's happening, but we've identified markers that go along with that occurrence. And they're acting out or whatever. When that happens in church, what we get is the devil is blamed for it. Mm-hmm. There's a scapegoating process that goes on, as opposed to finding out what's really happening to this person, because it couldn't possibly be our process or our little religious bubble. It couldn't be that. Well, what we find, and what more and more people are saying now, and the frustration they feel, because I feel it as well, is more and more you're finding out that bubble is being broken, and you are seeing the abuse has happened from inside. The affairs, the sexual assault, all kinds of things happening within the church construct. And it's not to blame anymore outside. It's to blame right there. But yet we still, and so instead of concentrating on the people that are suffering from that, we're concentrating on the event itself. And we're forgetting that all these people are having a trauma experience because of what they've gone through in this process. And so I think it's very, 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 very valid.
Yeah.
Do you think I hope they do a lot more work.
Yeah. Do you think there is an important need to differentiate between CPTSD to RTS, like having that definition in there and going, no, we need to have more specific look at the religious components of it. Because I think Marley, she's very on that kind of, I'm trying to get her on the podcast, but I don't think she's that interested.
That would be
good. She's very, very, very anti anything that looks religious, and I cater to all. So I don't know if she'll come on or not, but who knows? I think she's gone off to, listen to some of her. I don't know. It's just say, give me a link, and I'll let you know. I've not heard for a week and a half, so.
Well, just keep at her.
But she is hammering that hard of no, we really need this within the community. There needs to be education on some of these components of how churches deal with that. Like what you're saying.
I 100% agree.
Covered up, because to me that's hugely different. And as a therapist, if you're not, it's something I find really hard. I'm constantly recommending people find a therapist, because not everyone might need that, and certainly not everyone has, you know, RTS or PTSD coming out of this process. But talking to hundreds of people a week, I go through a fair few.
You've come across it.
And so I'm constantly going, look, you need to talk to a therapist, and then, well, what should I look for? You know, do I look for CBT? Do I look for DPT? And I was talking to Mark Harris about different disciplines that might be helpful, but above and beyond everything, I'm like, you need someone that understands this dynamic, because I don't know how equipped a lot of people are to deal with the complexities of what's going on in the narratives and the inner voices, and the fact that even the inner voices to you mean a whole host of different things that a lot of people don't even think, you know. And
so we come back to the terminology involved and the belief system that's behind it, because the problem with it is, here you can read in the DSM, you'll find that there are different descriptions in there. A lot of times, a lot of the therapy that is suggested for different disorders and stuff is religious in nature. And I actually asked an instructor that one time in a paper that I wrote. I said, what if the problem though is religion?
Yeah.
You can't use God as a fix if God is the issue. You can't do that. And so there has to be some delineation between the two to say, look, maybe complex PTSD that comes from, you know, violence or something like that. And I don't mean to dismiss that at all, but, you know, you witness something horrible happening, or you continue, there's child abuse, anything like that, then maybe God is an answer in that situation.
Absolutely.
Maybe a religious intervention.
That kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But in this situation, that's not true. And here's part of our problem as it pertains to like therapy and stuff. Because I know I had therapy suggested to me, but the people that they gave me recommendations to go see were pastors that didn't have training in psychology.
Yeah.
That's a huge
Not properly
issue.
Licensed. Yeah.
Exactly. They're a pastor, so they get away with dispensing that kind of advice legally. But ethically, I think that's wrong, because they don't have the training or the background in that area to make that. What they do is turn it into something spiritual. Yeah. Right. So now it becomes something spiritual. Well, the problem with that is it's too easy to put the problem outside of ourselves and say, well, you're being, you know, chased by the devil, or, you know, the devil made you do it, or whatever. Instead of bringing the responsibility back and saying, hold on, what is actually happening here? Where are you responsible? Where are other people in your life responsible? Let's fix this here in you. Let's work on you. Yeah. Instead of bringing this, you know, this religious element into it. So there's all this interaction between religion and trauma that maybe shouldn't be. So there should be some form of delineation between that and a different conversation had. So I would 100% agree that she's on the right track. Like, that has to be a separate conversation. Most of the time.
Certainly pastors. I mean, that's because even the agenda component to that is terrifying. Yes. Even someone like marriage therapy, I always say, look, go find a licensed person, because the truth is, a pastor will, their theology, everything is, do not get divorced. Well, what if you're getting abused? What if, you know, like, what if there's more complexity to this? Or what if it's a really crap match and the best thing in the world will be getting divorced? Thank God, let's get out of here. Let's look to build something healthier. That's not on the table for most pastors. And so,
okay, but go even a step further. What if it's something that you have a struggle with in the sexual realm? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you've been told to be pure your entire life until you get married, and now you're supposed to magically turn on a button that everything works sexually. Yep. And it doesn't. So now you have to go talk to a man who told you to stay pure your whole life and have him try and help you. That doesn't work.
Who you probably
have to
is
see somebody specific
sexually
to that.
repressed because of his theological frameworks and stuff as well. Yeah, exactly.
There's all kinds of issues here that it's not pertinent for that person to be involved in helping you figure that out. Yeah. Because he's not equipped to do that. Yeah. So that's a very big pet peeve of mine as well.
I find it interesting. So a lot of people, because on one side, talking to Mark was fascinating, because he was saying on one side, actually sending someone to a Christian therapist that is licensed, that understands the elements of, you know, not allowing their personal ethics to bleed in, is the best thing in a sense, because they actually understand the world you're coming from, although they might really struggle to frame it as a toxic thing or negative thing. So that might be hard for them. But actually, something that I've come across a lot in talking with people is they've gone to Christian therapists, and that therapist has struggled to not believe. If they're a Christian therapist, quote unquote, meaning maybe quite conventional beliefs, quite, you know, they're going to really struggle to understand what you're describing as a traumatic thing, because to them, that's just good. That's the good news. That's actually normal. What do you mean you're traumatized by thoughts of hell? You don't have to be like, you know, or maybe, well, you probably should be. Like they've got this inner narrative of, well, they should be traumatized by hell because they're apostate. You know,
I think it's a very difficult line to walk.
Really?
I would think so. Yeah. And not only that, but what if they're, as a Christian therapist, isn't the majority of what they're going to suggest as a way to treat that going to be religious in nature?
Yeah. I think anyone that says they're a therapist, if you need to use the word Christian in your description, immediately avoid. Like that's my advice. If they say they're a Christian therapist, if they're a therapist and they happen to be a Christian, but they didn't need to say, probably a bit safer.
Yes.
But it is. I do wonder. It's a bit like the whole. Does there need to be this pastor explosion, kind of like within this kind of movement, or a pastoral explosion? Does there need to be a whole world of therapy that is post-religious therapy, almost? So people that actually have been on this process. It fascinates me. Do you get a lot of work in this area?
You may see that. You may see that coming up. That may be a part of this evolution, that there'll become a new, field, so to speak, in the realm of therapy based on this kind of need.
Yeah. Because it's problematic not being defined, not being a specific diagnosis or anything like that. Like, so if I go online to like an online, in the UK, we kind of have like different branches of being licensed, and you can type in on that website, you put in your address and it gives you all the licensed people within, and you can contact them, and it'll show you their disciplines and things like that. There's no way particularly for me to go, I've got religious trauma, or I've got some sort of spiritual, like,
it's not delineated right now that way.
And so I do wonder, we probably do need some form of, until there's a definition, until there's a category on systems like that, it's going to be very hard to find the right person.
The closest you have probably is a trauma-related therapist at this point. But again, I don't know that that's specific enough.
Yeah.
But that's probably the closest you could find.
Maybe it becomes common enough that it just becomes normative anyway. Who knows?
Well, with the number of people leaving churches and questioning their beliefs, it's a very real possibility.
Yeah.
And maybe actually shows a need for that kind of field.
Yeah.
To actually be something that those in the psychology field are considering, because that it seems like there would be a lot of value to that. I mean, that's my interest. That wasn't my original interest in entering the psychology field, but it definitely played into it, and now has become the predominant interest. So I think that's a good change if it happens.
Is there much work in this area? Are you breaking very much new ground, or as you're looking at this, are you seeing quite a bit of study within the area of like people leaving church communities, what it's doing psychologically to them?
I think if you look specifically for that, you can find some of it. I don't think there's a whole lot of it out there right now. I am noticing a lot more peer-reviewed stuff on religious abuse and religious trauma and all that kind of stuff. You are starting to see more of that. So again, that's broadening the spectrum, so to speak, as far as the need for that kind of conversation. So the foundation is maybe being built into that. I see it going that way, which is, like I said, why I've kind of catered my interest into that area. And because it's such a personal thing for me, it was something I've experienced. And so I really want to understand it a lot better. But I also want that experience to be valuable. So if it can serve to help somebody else, then that's a plus. But again, that's a dicey line to walk, because my experience will never match somebody else's. So I still have to be very careful with that.
Yeah, it's really intriguing to me, the whole concept of well-being psychologically, how it affects people. I mean, it's the guy that I'm working with, the research company, their director keeps hammering on. He's like, the one that I want you to do the most. He's just interested. He's like, please do a well-being scale. He's like, just throw a couple of well-being scales in there and let's see how they're getting on, because it is fascinating. But generally speaking, the data says people involved in religious communities are happier. Generally speaking, a lot of that's probably through the community, or
I was going to say, is it specific to religious community or just community in general?
Yeah, well, I've seen studies to say community does a huge amount for people as well, but absolutely. And what's interesting is inactive religiosity is almost completely indifferent to someone that has no affiliation at all. So it does seem very much it's to do with being active in your religious practice. I also think a lot of people, I posted some of those data pieces the other day on Instagram, and people were commenting their opinions. I asked people for their opinions, and like a vast majority of them said, to be honest with you, when I was a Christian, I would have felt compelled to say that I was happier than I am. And I would have felt that that's just, I should be happier. And I would even see myself as happier. It was only when I left that I look back and go, I wasn't happy at all. I was just kind of living in this narrative. And so maybe there's a lot of that as well.
Well, I think that speaks a lot to, and I don't know if you've heard the term or not before, but mimetic theory actually talks about the genesis of desire and comporting oneself in a way that matches everyone around them. I mean, we've known about that for years. We always talk about peer pressure in teenagers and stuff, but that's very, very real for adults as well. So yes, if I'm going to church, that's the Sunday morning syndrome, right? And everybody is, even if you've never heard that term before, that's a reality most people are familiar with. You get up on Sunday morning, everybody's fighting, nobody can get their shoes on, but we got to get to church. And as soon as we get to church, our family's perfect. We've had, everything goes well and we're projecting our best thing forward. And then we go home and life just becomes messy again. Right. But yet we feel compelled to make sure that everybody knows that we're fine. We're good Christians. We're good. We're happy. We're fine. So there's this need to project that happiness because that's the expectation of Christianity. That you're supposed to be happy and secure and have faith and all of these things. So you project what's expected rather than maybe what you truly feel, which is why you'll find if you do, and I think if you look at studies, it bears it out, the number of alcoholics in church, active alcoholics, active drug users, people having marital affairs. I mean, those things are statistically happening in church, but we don't talk about those. Everybody's happy. And so it becomes, so again, is it expectation or is it actually, they're actually happy? I don't know. I don't know. How do you tell the difference? Because if they're not willing to tell you the truth, how would you find that out?
And even an anonymous study, like most of these usually are, like even the self-deceit of me believing my own story as well. It's fascinating. Well, so we see grief, we see, some trauma. Do you see specific, do you see any other things psychologically happening to people that are going through this process, maybe more positively or negatively in different areas? Or do you?
Well, I mean, some of the biggest stuff that's happening is, of course, confirmation bias. That's easily seen anywhere. We only read or expose ourselves to those things with which we already agree. It feels comfortable. The problem with that is we live in an echo chamber, basically. Cognitive dissonance is huge. If it doesn't match my narrative, I have to do mental gymnastics to make sure I can justify why it doesn't. Or I just dismiss it as not true. So there's a bunch of different processes that are very mundane, well-known psychological processes that are deeply embedded in all of this. But none of us are most of us are unable to step outside of it and go and recognize when we're in it, we don't notice that. It's when you finally somehow step outside of it and you go, oh, wow, I did that. So it's all of that stuff is very interesting. So there's a lot of different psychology that goes into this whole process, more so than just grief. I just thought grief was the most profound, or because I was experiencing it. So it was very profound to me.
No, I mean, it is. It's really, really fascinating. And you're not, you are far from alone in that. And I'm sure that you're far from alone. The other day I posted a thing saying, what did you experience or lose? What did you feel, maybe grief of loss over the most? And it was overwhelming, reading through hundreds of people commenting what they felt they'd lost. And what's fascinating is, again, it points to most of the data that's there already, is the number one thing was community. There was a lot of other things, but community was the one that stood out. And it fascinates me that you wouldn't believe that narrative within the church. If people said, what's the most important thing here? You wouldn't feel that you could say, oh, well, us. Right. You would think that the answer is God, or, Jesus, my relationship with God, or something. And people do go, oh, I'm grieving the loss of a relationship with God because I don't know how to relate to God anymore. Or I'm grieving the loss of God entirely because I don't even know how that works or who he is or whatever it is.
If he is.
The grief of myself, even some of it was family, some of it was friends, but predominantly it was, I'm grieving the loss of having a place to be and belong. And so it's a huge, huge area. I'm really excited for whatever it holds in the future, what you're going to be bringing out. So your book is out, did you say? Or
no, it's been edited and it's been sent to the publisher, who sent me a very big, nice message that he wholeheartedly was excited that he finally got my book. He had a big smile on his face and he said, this is my unequivocal acceptance.
Wonderful.
And I said, read it, please. Because he said, I haven't read it yet. I'm like, well, you have to read it. You can't tell me. So you got to read. No, I know you and your writing. So I know I'm going to take it. And I'm like, that doesn't make me feel better. So you have to read it. Because I'm almost positive everybody's going to hate it. That's how I see it. So I'm like, no, you have to read it first before you tell me that. So I haven't heard back from him. So I'm assuming he's reading it or he's having someone read it. So I'll wait to see the final declaration on that.
Wait till you get his notes back.
Exactly.
See if it's equally as big. Yeah.
Well, he sent me a message at the beginning of the year, and because we've been talking about this for over a year and a half, and he sent me a message at the beginning of the year, and he says, so tell me, is 2020 going to be your year? And I said, I'm positive it's going to be. I'm going to make it my year, because I was struggling so hard to write it.
Yeah.
Especially as it pertained to like the idea of acceptance in the grief cycle. I didn't know what that looked like. So I was having a very hard time writing. It felt very hypocritical to try and write something I didn't understand. So it wasn't until I could start feeling some of that I was like, okay, now I can write on this. So it took a while. So I'm hoping he's going to get it out this year. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'm just happy I'm done.
You definitely let me know, and I'll
okay.
Yeah, I'll put it out there for sure.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. Honestly,
absolutely.
I love fascinating people, and you are definitely a fascinating person. Lots of interesting thoughts on lots of different areas. We probably could have gone down about 110 different routes.
Probably.
But yeah, I'm trying not to go through too many. It's been so hot here. It's been like,
oh really?
Low 80s, which is so hot in the UK.
Oh, I love that.
Which is ridiculous, because we are humid here, more humid.
Yeah.
But when you're not used to it, I used to live in California. I mean, I can do
California is my deal. So,
but I am like, I'm just dying. It's like midnight, so it's not too late. But I'm like, it's so hot. I've just been in the sun all day, pretty much. I'm just like, I'm dying.
Oh, that's right. It's much later there for you.
Yeah, I know it's 8 hours. It's the way of the podcast. If you want to interview people on the West Coast, it's late at night, or they get up at the crack of dawn. I'll take the hit.
Yeah.
If people are spending 2 hours of their time talking to me, I'll take the hit.
Well, that was nice of you.
Yeah. No, it's great. So wonderful. I'll let you know when this kind of comes out, and you'll be free to. I don't know if you listen to your things again. I never listen.
I do, yeah, sometimes. I've got a couple that I've done recently that I haven't listened to, so I need to go back to. But my husband listens. He came home last night. Well, he listens to my podcast, so he came home last night to give me some corrective grammar stuff in my podcast. I'm like, God, stop it! Now I'm going to think about that every time.
Nobody needs that in their life. I know.
That's just the way he does things. So.
Oh dear, that's funny. What's your podcast about?
My podcast is called Bookish, The Canon Continues. It's same publisher. He brought it to me and said, hey, I think this would be good for you. Basically, it's the idea that even though the canon is closed, that God still inspires people in different ways. And so the tagline is bridging the sacred and secular divide book by book. So the premise is sometimes I do single episodes where I've chose the book I want to talk about. Most of the time I have somebody on with me. They choose a book and I read it. Oh, wow. And then we start discussing its applicability to life, to God, to our lives, everything. Wow. So we've done some really good ones.
Yeah,
so.
You must be a reader, though. I mean, like, to be adding that to your life of like, oh gosh, how often does your podcast come out?
Every 2 weeks.
Oh, I get stressed about adding another book to my life every 2 weeks. That's
well, that's why he brought it to me, because he's like, I know that you read like a tremendous amount, and I do. I read probably. I've never kept actual count, but just ballpark it, anywhere from 175 to 200 books a year, and probably more. But so I do read very quickly. Mm-hmm. And he actually sent me one to read the other night, and I read it in a night and said, okay, here's my feedback on that. So I'm very blessed that way. I retain well, and I read quick.
So jealous. I read brutally slow, and I try and do a couple of books a week. But and a lot of the books I'm reading are not, the vast majority of books I'm reading are not like simple stories about anecdotes, like what you're writing there. Like I probably would breeze that much quicker, but once you're reading stuff that is footnotes every
it's a little denser. Oh
my gosh, I hate it. I do
some
not know
of them
how to
are
get better.
Well, the ones that I dislike, it's not that I dislike the book, it's the fact, like I had one that the book they brought to me was on mimetic theory, which I'm a student of, but not a very good student of.
Okay.
And so I had to discuss this book and I'm like, this is way over my head. And I just felt completely out of my league with this person. And he was very gracious about it. He was, I mean, we had a great conversation.
Sure.
But I had this idea of how it went. And then I had to listen back to it. And I was like, oh, okay, it was better than I thought. Because I was just positive. I sounded
really
like a dummy.
That is why I have people come on my podcast and I just ask them stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, brief. I thought I knew, but I'm pretty confident I won't know. So explain it to me. It's just easier.
Great way to learn, though. I mean, because even if you don't agree with the person, you now have learned a new perspective about something. So
absolutely.
I think conversation is an amazing way of doing that. So
but
that's why I like mine too, because we just sit and chat about the books. I mean,
it's funny. I was in the South recently in Georgia, and there's this business guy there who started his own podcast, and he's kitted out one of the rooms in his offices, and it's like, cameras everywhere. Like he's got a guy that like switches between cameras and like records.
Damn, I just have a microphone.
I'm like, dude, I'm lucky if you get a microphone some days. I mean, some of the people I interview don't even have a microphone. I mean, it's
right.
And so like. Anyway, he's like kitted out, but he's like, this is the best thing ever. He's like, I don't really like to read because I read books and I just have questions and I don't know how to answer the questions. So he's like, so instead of buying the book and reading it, I just have people fly to me, come to my office, sit down, and I talk to them for a few podcasts and I ask them my questions, I ask them to explain it, then I ask questions. He's like, it's like better than reading a book. I was like, that's the way to do it. I mean, and that's basically what I'm doing as well, probably.
Yeah.
So
that's all right. I mean, everybody does their thing differently. So
yeah.
I just started listening to Audible books not too long ago, which it's never been my forte. Okay. I need something in front of me. I like to be able to see it. So, but I've gotten much more adept at it now. And there's quite a few I started listening to recently on some more in-depth subjects. So that's a little harder to do, but
listening to the in-depth ones. Oh yeah, man.
But tough. You know what ends up happening is if I find it to be really good, I end up ordering the book anyway.
Really?
So then I have it in both formats.
That's funny. If you get them at the same time,
I've never read,
they're like way cheaper as well, but you end up not doing that as well, which is funny.
Well, the other day I came across a subject matter I wanted to know more about. So I actually got 2 different books on Audible about it, but then I ordered another book.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll get different perspectives that way. Yeah. But it'll be on the same subject matter.
I find that with Audible, though, I love it because I like to unwind at the end of the day. I'll just put it on and then I'll just have like a stupid like game on my iPad or something. I can just like, it busies my hands and like has one part of my brain just like not distracted and not wandering, but I can just focus. And I'm listening.
That's how I work all the time.
It's called How to Be an Anti-Racist, and it's a phenomenal book. Really recommend it. I can't remember the guy's name. I can't remember, but people will find it for that. But it's a great book. But I tell you what, I'm listening to it, and the whole time I'm just like, I'm going to have to listen to this book like 4 or 5 times. He's just like, this is just so many concepts. Probably not academically too complex or anything, but it's just like when you're talking about a world that you just don't experience from that perspective, and you're probably on the other side, if you're honest, you go, God, I'm gonna have to like so many times. It kills me. And a lot of my audibles I listen to at like 1.25 or 1.25, just speed up a bit,
just a little bit.
This one I'm like, dude, I need like 0.25.
I need to slow it down. Well, I actually like the paper books because I actually like for my podcast because I'll highlight and take notes in the margins. I have a notebook where I'm taking notes so that I almost have an outline when I discuss it. Like, and I know I had a quote on this page, I can go to it and everything, But if I'm just reading for me, Audible's okay, but I still like that.
Yeah,
I'm the same way with electronic books too. Electronic books, I love my Kindle, but that's usually only for fiction.
Yeah.
Just because I don't have to keep track of notes on fiction most of the time. So
that's funny. My wife just doesn't let me buy more books. She just knows how many books I have that I've not finished. So I have to buy a lot of them on Kindle, so there's less deliveries.
Yeah, that way it doesn't show
I'm
up.
not actually going to stop the problem. I'm not going to deal with my addiction.
And how amazing is Kindle? Like, I want a book, I find it, I download it. I mean, it's done.
Amazing.
Yeah.
A lot of books, you can just download the sample, and by the time they finish the sample, you're like, I kind of get what you're going to say. You've summed it up well enough in the introduction that I know what you're saying. Yes, fine.
Well, I love, because my podcast is with the same publisher that I work with. Like if we have a book coming out, like he sent me a proof book a few weeks ago of a book that's not coming out till September, and it was fantastic. And so I just called him. I'm like, is there any chance I can get that book? He's like, yeah, I'll send you a proof. I'm like, yes.
Brilliant. That's so good.
It's not the final thing, but it's just going to be editing. It's by that point, it's just editing. Yeah. But so that's been very nice too. He's like, yeah, I'll help you get whatever books you need.
That is awesome.
I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Except my bookcase is becoming, 2. Like there's 2 on each shelf. There's a double.
It's evolving, yeah.
Yeah, I need a new bookshelf. So.
Oh man, books are not. Yeah, I mean, none of these are even my books. These are just books from like a yesteryear from my wife. So most of them are like, you don't want to give them to like a charity shop sort of thing. You want to torch them. But I've gone to a place where actually I'd probably give them to a charity shop because someone will find them helpful.
Yeah, I think the only books I've ever thrown away was the Left Behind series. I threw that entire thing away. My husband actually got rid of it. Man. But I'd read it like 5 or 6 times all the way through or something, so years ago.
That's one of my biggest cringe moments when I look back at different moments of my life. When I was I'm showing how young I am, probably about 17, I think I was in one of my first jobs, and I was in my lunch break and I was reading Left Behind.
Oh.
And I don't know which one it was. They're all the same. They're just flying around the world like nonstop. Like jet fuel is just like, lying.
I know, right?
But they're doing the thing. And then my boss comes in and he's like, oh, what are you reading? And I'm like, oh, it's a book about like, whatever. I'm trying to explain it. And he's like, I can't remember what he said. He said like, oh, like, I don't really go for that fiction or whatever. And I was like, well, you'll find out soon enough. It's not fiction. And I still look back at that and I'm like, oh, I just cringe.
Oh my God, I know. Like, I cringe about so much.
Boss, like, oh. But yeah, I got
that's part of the whole process is learning to forgive yourself for what you didn't know before.
Absolutely. One of my biggest Facebook posts when I first started on Facebook, probably about 12, 13 years ago now, was I posted, I don't know which has done the most damage, the Satanic Bible or the Left Behind series.
That's a good point.
Blew up because I was in the charismatic world at that time.
Yeah. I bet you got.
I wasn't in the charismatic world psychologically, maybe, but I was there.
Right.
Oh man, I got pulled
I bet you took a lot for that.
I was in a position of leadership. It was interesting. But yeah, it was good fun. Good books, man. They were page turners, So.
They were. I couldn't wait for the next one to come out.
Lion faces and what's next? And yeah.
Well, I grew up so terrified of all of that and so certain that it was going to happen in my lifetime that, I was fascinated with the subject matter. And so those books, I couldn't read them fast enough. And I read them over and over and over, along with, Late Great Planet Earth. I mean, every book that had anything to do with that, I read all of those as I was growing up. And I look back now and I that's one of the things about this whole process. You said you asked people what they were grieving the most. For me, it wasn't community. For me, I'm grieving the time that I feel like I lost, because I'm older now, and so I look back and I think, God, I wasted so much time when I could have been doing things and studying and learning all these things, much earlier than I am now.
Yeah.
But the only way to reconcile that is to say things happen for a reason, I guess, in some form
or fashion.
And you
wouldn't be you where you are right now with it's so tough, isn't it? Because I had a pastor, it was about, she's been pastor for like 25 years or so, and she's like in tears talking to me going, I've wasted 25 years of my life. And
that's how it feels.
Trying to like empathize with that as but also going, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
We don't know, maybe you'd be in a much better place, maybe, but would you want to be different than you are? The person, not your circumstances, but who you are.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's tough, isn't it?
If there was only a way to be the person I am now earlier, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, it's like when you watch this, like, like a teen comedy or something, you think, God, I wish I could go back to high school as me. Because, I would just,
I never want to go back to high school. I'm way beyond that. I don't ever want to do that again. I don't have any desire for that. But I'd like to go back. I'd like to go back to about 40. I could be comfortable at 40 again.
Yeah. That's funny. So as an avid reader, what are your top picks for people that are going through deconstruction?
Oh boy, I don't know. I've read so many. It depends. I mean, are we talking about religious tenets that they're discussing, or there's it's such a broad range.
Dang it, deconstruction. let's avoid theology and more maybe the journey, or even just things that peripherally maybe helped you on your journey? You know, maybe a good novel that you were like, gosh, this spoke to me on the process. Or
I don't know that I had any that really spoke to me on the process. There were just so many that I read to understand myself better. A lot of books on psychology and, you know, and I found value even in a lot of the fictional ones I've read. You know, there's some little thing that you take away from them because they're applicable to our lives if we allow them to be. I don't know that anything stands out, like specifically in deconstruction.
Sure.
In my journey, yeah, there's a few. When I first started asking the questions theologically, The Jesus-Driven Life by Michael Hardin was...
Love Michael.
Yeah, it was a very big page turner for me, as well as some of his books. I don't know if you know about his books on all the shaman stuff. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, Walking with Grandfather?
Yes, I loved Walking with Grandfather. I actually went to one of Michael's conferences for the week, beautiful. Out in the woods and doing all the fun stuff. Yeah, Matthew and I both went. We had a good time with that.
He's an amazing guy.
Yeah, he's there's so much to learn from him.
Now,
I actually
one
just
thing
had a
I will
phone call.
say, you're the first person I've ever heard to describe Jesus-Driven Life as a page turner. For me, it's my number one recommended book for people that are theologically trying to frame things. But it's the last book I would say that you'll get through quickly. Like people just, I sat there for weeks going, oh God, I need to go back and read the chapter again.
Oh, I read through it a couple times.
It was intense.
Yeah.
I've told Michael this as well. I'm good friends with Michael, so yeah.
Yeah, I loved his books.
So good.
I think I've got every book he's written. There's a few of them I haven't read, but some of his Facebook, I haven't read all of those because I saw a lot of his stuff on Facebook. So I was, you know. So his book has been very big. Theologically speaking, Doug Campbell has a lot of books, or has The Deliverance of God, which I've never got all the way through.
I was going to say, you're not saying that's a page turner, geez.
No, that one's dense. But I did do a reading group in which you could read that book, but along with it, you read some peripheral literature about that book by Chris Tilling. Has a couple books, and I love Chris. He's a good guy. Like he cracks me up on Facebook. He's for a theologian. He's a funny guy.
Yeah.
So I've read some of his books. So so a lot of things theologically like that were stopgap, you know, that kind of opened the theological world up to me, things that I didn't know because I was so very stuck in what I knew. Didn't realize there were other eschatological views. I didn't realize there were other viewpoints on hell. You know, I still remember I watched Kevin Miller's documentary on Hellbound.
Yeah.
And of course, Michael's in that as well. And I watched that in my living room, and my husband was here, and so was one of my daughters. And I was fascinated by it, and I'm taking it all in. And we got done with it, and I looked over at my husband, who, by the way, was not in the same place as deconstruction as I was, which is, of course, very difficult.
Yeah,
he looked at me, and before I could say anything, he put his finger up. He goes, "I don't want to talk about this." And he got up and left the room, and he refused to speak about it. And I was devastated. I was like, I need to talk about this. This is all brand new to me. I had no idea there were other viewpoints on hell, you know, or on, you know, eternity. And so, yeah,
Poor guy, though. I mean, like, are you kidding? No wonder he doesn't want to talk about this, because you have no, like, what's going on in his mind? Just witnessing that.
Oh, that caused, so talking about relationships and community, I mean, that's another area that I cover in the book too, the idea of how devastating that process can be on your relationships, your very close relationships. There was an evening when I sat here when I was questioning whether the Bible was truthful or not, you know, if it was infallible or not. And I remember him standing there screaming at me, like yelling at me, like, what is wrong with you? I don't know who you are anymore. And I like very seriously thought I might lose my marriage over something that I had no control over. Like I didn't ask for any of this. It just happened.
Absolutely.
And yet it was going to have this very detrimental effect on my family. So we still don't agree on a lot of, he's come a very long way. He questions a lot of the same things now. And he kind of laughs about it now. He's like, yeah, I remember when you were questioning that. I had a hard time with it. Now I'm questioning it too. So we still have our differences of opinion, but he's a little more in line with things now. But
it's a hard thing, and not everyone does, right? I mean, not everyone does start questioning that. And the thing is, it's really tough because of all the things you marry a spouse, you know, you marry someone for, you know, there's lots of things, and most of them we realize can change. You know, marry someone because you like how they look, now that can change. You marry them because of, you know, whatever, like that could change. But your faith would never
change,
change, right? And ultimately, that's the number one, right? Before you even think, are they smart? Are they funny? Are they intelligent? Are they good looking? Like, or whatever your categories are in your tick boxes, how tall they are or whatever. The thing that you're thinking as a Christian is, well, they've got to be a believer. Like, that's just the first thing. And so then your wife turns to you and goes, hey, did you see that hellband?
I don't think I believe it.
You're like,
what?
What's happening right now? You know, like, I mean, it's a very, very foundational thing to process. I mean, it's hard for people to process in marriage, their partner changing in any way sometimes, because you're like, well, I want you to be that. Maybe some people marry people because they want them to change. I don't know.
Right. As a project, who knows?
But yeah, it's a brutal. That was something I talked a lot about with Mark, because obviously he's a relationships is a lot of what he does in this therapist.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine. Yeah,
it's difficult. It's very difficult, and it's unfortunately kind of sad as well, because I when I started questioning things, I was questioning things theologically in church. There were other things going on in church that ultimately led to disagreement as well. But as I said, we knew a lot of the inner workings. But I was questioning all the theology stuff. So when we were asked to leave, my first thing was I felt so guilty. Like, I got my family kicked out of church. Yeah. And I felt devastated. I said, it feels like driving a car in which there's an accident and you're responsible for all the injury, but my husband said something to me then. He said, you're not responsible. He said, look, you were just ahead of the rest of us. It doesn't mean we weren't questioning. You were just more vocal and ahead of us in the process, if you can put it on a linear process. And he's like, so it doesn't mean that you were responsible for us. It means that you were just ahead of us in the mindset, and you were the one that was vocal about it. And I'm like, yeah, but I still feel responsible.
Did he feel that initially, or is that more of his reflections on that?
No, he said that initially.
Right, initially. Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, really he did. But then we proceeded to have issues, as you go down the rabbit trails, some of the rabbit trails go a little deeper than maybe somebody's comfortable with.
Yeah.
But he actually, well, nobody's going to church right now, but he actually goes to church. I have one of my daughters lives in Texas. She and her husband go to church. But I don't, and my other 3 children and their spouses do not. Yeah. So that's, I every now and then end up back in that place where I feel a sense of responsibility as a parent, like I've failed somehow because my children don't have a relationship with God. And then I have to kind of laugh and go, well, you don't exactly have one right now either. So what are you going to do? But my daughter that's in Washington, actually the one that really struggled through it, she sent me a thing on Mother's Day and she said, thank you for always telling me it's okay to not be okay. And I think that's really true. And so I have to keep reminding myself of that for myself, but also that it's okay that they're not okay. I have to allow them to go through. Yeah. And thank goodness they're going through it much younger than I did. They're not going to have as much time to grieve as I do.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not going to have as much to get rid of, belief-wise. Yeah, all the different
but the cringy, I mean, the cringiness of thinking, you're talking about being cringeworthy over Left Behind and things like that. The cringiness of looking back at and realizing what you exposed your children to.
Yeah. No.
And they laugh at me now. They're like, oh, Mom, remember when you said this? I'm like, shut up. I don't want to think about that, and then, but there's guilt associated with that too. Like, oh my God, I'm responsible for them learning that in the first place. Yeah. So, it's a lot of, so that all goes into the grief process too.
Gosh. Yeah. It's crazy. I just had a partners call with some of the people that support me, and we just do a Zoom every month, and it's fascinating because 2 of them had a very different response to having kids. So one of them said that when they have kids, they were like, I need to go back to church. I want my kid to grow up in a community and whatever.
Yes.
But he was like, obviously I don't want my kid to believe what they're teaching. Like, I'm going to help them see, hey, this is how different people think. There's a lot of people in this world that are religious and think like this.
That's healthy.
I believe differently, and I want you to grow up and do that. The other person on the call was like, dude, I had the exact opposite response. I had kids and I was like, dude, I'm done. I'm done trying to make the church work. I'm done because I do not want my kids hearing a word of this toxic. And it just so fascinates me that, like, I couldn't tell you one is right or one is wrong. In fact, I would argue that probably both are right for that person.
Right.
And who knows, maybe we'll find out in the long term that was right, wrong, whatever. But it's so interesting, isn't it, that we, and I think just that probably should help us extend ourselves a bit more grace and self-compassion as we reflect on our past, that actually a lot of people would have done exactly what you did and would have said, no, actually, that was quite probably helpful, informative. And you can probably look at your kids and go, actually, their season in church, whatever season that was and however long, has made them who they are. And
it's influenced for sure.
Ways.
Yeah, it's influenced. Yeah. It's funny to hear some of those questions come out of my kids' mouth now. Well, how come da 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 da? And I'm like, because when they were younger, I remember one time when my daughter told me, we were still in church, none of this had even started yet. My daughter told me, we said something about saying allegiance to the flag of the United States. And she's like, well, I don't think we should do that as Christians. I was like, what are you talking about? Because I was in the Marine Corps. I was so raised funny. God Country Corps. Yeah. That was, your thing. And she's telling me, I, as a Christian, I don't think we're supposed to swear allegiance to anything but God. And I was like, oh, are you crazy? And now I think back to that, I'm like, God, she's absolutely right. But she was right then. So and I was like, what is wrong with you?
So interesting stuff. Because I've lived in America, I can enter into that world easier than most. But in Europe, that is such a fascinating concept, looking across at America and going,
oh, I'm sure we're quite the debacle.
Well, we all are in different ways. I mean, I'm in the UK, God, we're not doing the best in the world. But it is fascinating. I just had Kevin Miller on talking about his latest documentary, which is about the
he was on mine too.
But that conflation of nationalism and faith, and actually not being able to actually figure out where one begins and one ends, like the J.
And it's an angry conversation too. If you have that, if you get involved in that conversation, it's awful.
Because
don't touch my politics.
Nationalism is touching my God. Touching my God is touching my politics. That's right.
And to suggest that a Christian shouldn't be involved in politics that's like somebody set off a bomb. Because it's so, like you said, it's so conflated that they can't see a difference between the two. I always joke, I'm like, I swear we act here like we're the only country that has any Christian influence. Like Christianity only exists in the United States.
Yeah. It's so
there's a whole world that has Christians in it, right? Like we have American, I always use air quotes, American Christianity, which is something I really want nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it looks good.
Well, it fascinates me as a European in a maybe modern, moving into postmodern society. The church is, Stuart Murray's done a lot of great work on post-Christendom. And so like understanding that, yes, our culture still reflects a lot of our Christian upbringing and backgrounds and whatever, and that just flavors everything in a sense.
Right.
But actually, as far as Christendom, as far as this institution that has power, it's gone in Europe. It doesn't really exist overall.
And that's
maybe certain countries here
and there.
To
think of.
Of course. Do you think? But so something that I often thought, looking at America before I got there, and even still now, I still think this sometimes. I go, they're just 20, 25 years behind. Give them another couple of decades and they'll be in the same place.
If we survive.
The church is dying. God, if we don't nuke each other or
right, if we all survive it,
or whatever we do. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but I often wonder, and I often think, gosh, it's just such a different bubble. I don't know if Europe ever even was like that. Like it's such a unique component. It's really fascinating. Because do you think, I don't know if you feel particularly ability to answer this question, but I'm going to put you on the spot and require you to.
Okay.
I'm intrigued by the component of when we conflate our faith and our politics so much. When the faith dies, what happens to the politics? That's my question, I guess, in a sense of, is Christianity dying in America? Probably long term, unless something radically changes, it will see this mass exodus. It will slowly die. There'll be less and less churches. But will its politics die in turn? That I'm intrigued when they're so interwoven.
Personally, my contention is that historical Christianity has long been dying in the United States. What you have now is that combined effect of politics and religion. So much so that apparently, and I've been in conversations where this has been said, if you don't vote Republican, you're not actually a Christian.
Sure.
Which is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, half the Christian population in America, well, maybe not half, but a good portion vote Democrat.
Yeah, but they're going to hell, so yeah. That's what I'm told anyway. But try not being one or the other.
Yeah.
And that's inexcusable as well. Then you're the reason the other one got elected. Like if you vote independently, you're part of the problem. Which always cracks me up, because I'm like, in this country, my vote is mine to do with as I choose. If I choose to exercise it, I can exercise it in the way that I choose, or I don't have to exercise it at all. That's my choice. That's my freedom. That's my right, if we're going to get down to those terms. And yet you will be castigated by either side.
100%.
So I think the answer to your question is if Christianity goes away, I still think you're going to have Christianity, because I think it's become its own separate animal combined with politics. As I said, I air quoted as American Christianity. I really feel that type of Christianity is often very different from what we know or see around the world as Christianity.
Sure. I mean, it's very obvious to me to some degree. We all live in a bubble, but when I travel extensively, to different regions in the world, you very quickly go, that's Australian Christianity.
It's different.
That's American Christianity.
Different.
And you start to go, so that's American. That's not Christianity. That's American.
Right. Exactly.
What are the common grounds across the board? Oh, that's probably a bit more likely Christianity. Right. The rest is our culture influencing that, which could be a Christian flavor of culture or whatever, but
which is why you have ass-kicking Jesus in the end. I mean, you have those people
absolutely.
Jesus is coming back with vengeance.
AR-15 and his American
He's always pretty built too. Like he's always,
Dude.
I always want to know what his workout program is, because he looks pretty good.
Especially, have you seen? Is it the Philippines Jesus who's got like a 48 pack? It's like, what is even happening?
Yeah, the ab thing going on and everything. Yeah, like wow, that dude was working out.
that he had very little time for anything. When Jesus went up the mountain to have time alone, he was lifting.
He was lifting and doing crunching
planks for days.
That's why he went by himself, so nobody knew that was going on, apparently.
Seriously.
But yeah, so you have this very Americanized idea that goes along with not only Christianity but Jesus himself, and the politics behind that. Try suggesting that rather than fighting against abortion, maybe you should be fighting for better benefits or better, things that would alleviate abortion. No, you just have to fight against abortion. And if you say, well, I'm pro-life, but I feel that's not my right to tell anybody else what to do, you're still, I'm still wrong. So pro-life, I don't want to see anybody have an abortion, but I think that the way to handle that is to go fix the things in life that are causing women to choose that.
Whatever,
right, whatever the case may be. Let's fix those problems that are causing women to want an abortion, rather than standing outside. Because how much effect are you having standing outside of a clinic with a cardboard sign? You're not changing anything. No. But if you were to do these other things, you would actually be making a change.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. It's the bottom line. That is the.
I wonder how much of that is a
definition.
Grief component. Thinking of a loss of almost identity with your nation, or even maybe a grieving of much like someone that's had an abortion. So say you've had an abortion and then you get saved into a conventional evangelical kind of background, because not all Christianity is very strongly anti-abortion
there are different elements,
but but if they're saved into one, there would be this kind of grieving process anew, which good God is probably not very helpful or whatever, but of grieving, oh gosh, what have I done in this past life? But you actually flip it and you start to go, oh gosh, what have I done because I've conflated my faith and my politics? I've voted a way that I don't approve of, whether it's Democrat or Republican or independent or whatever, but
whatever it is,
elements when those two become conflated, because you can look at certain pockets. If you look at the historically Black Protestant movement, a fairly decent sized movement in the US, almost entirely vote Democrat. And so it's not to conflate necessarily one way or the other. I think it happens both ways at times. But there might be an element of coming out of that and starting to be able to see some of the differences and go, oh, because there's a certain sense of personal responsibility with someone's vote, with someone's identity, with what they cheer, with what they don't cheer. I know Brian Zahnd speaks a lot about, him literally looking forward to watching people die on TV in the Iraq War. He was looking forward to going, we're going to win. I can't wait to watch the American television. I'm too young for that. I was probably like 6 or 7 during the beginnings of that. But I can't associate with that. My parents were so kind of normal European Christian. We were anti-violence was a very basic kind of principle.
Well, but it comes back to that very dichotomous viewpoint again. You know, right and wrong. If you're in the right, then anything that happens to the people in the wrong, they deserve.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a basic element. That's another thing. Like I said, when we were talking about universalism earlier, shouldn't we hope that that's true? Well, some people can't. Shouldn't we hope that this person doesn't go to hell? And Hitler always gets thrown into that conversation almost immediately. And I'm like, well, shouldn't you hope that Hitler got rehabilitated? Shouldn't you hope? I mean, yes, he was a horrible man. Nobody's disputing that. But shouldn't you hope, as a Christian, shouldn't you hope that he was redeemable by God? Because what you're saying is that there are limits to God's redeeming ability if there's somebody he can't get to.
Mm.
And so I think a very big part of deconstruction is confronting some of those mindsets, even into politics. So and I think that gets to that level of the spectrum where you're starting to deconstruct yourself and to say, well, or even God, here's what I've believed about God, because I've always believed God stood on the side of this political thing,
sure.
And now I have to maybe take a step back and go, maybe I'm wrong about that. So that's another very big area, I think, for deconstruction. And that one will mess you up too, because now you're not just going against, your ideas of religion, but you're going against God himself. You're going against country. You're going against every single person you have a relationship with, because they know you in a certain construct. And now you're stepping outside of that construct. That's dicey.
Yeah.
Across the board. It's like I said, it's such a big conversation. This whole subject matter is such a huge conversation that I don't know that you can ever hit it from every angle that it needs to be discussed from.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing for someone that does a podcast.
Yeah, exactly, because you can keep hitting it
I'm not going to
so
run
many
out
different
of stuff to talk about, that's for sure.
Oh my gosh. Funny. I don't know. But like I said, sometimes it all gets to be a little much. I'm like, oh, okay. It's just so much information. And you kind of have to take a break from it every now and then.
Yeah,
I think that's what people are doing when they're saying, I don't believe in God anymore. I think a lot of times it is for me. I've just reached a point where I need a break. Like, I don't need to think about God. I don't need to think. I just need to be alone with my thoughts for a while and not worry if somebody's looking over my shoulder or not. I just need that little bit of time. And then that'll probably change, because I do miss those ideas of God. I mean, I got very bad news earlier today. A very good friend of mine has stage 4 cancer. That's devastating. And my first impulse with that is I want comfort for that from God. I want to believe that if I pray, God will heal him. I don't know that or believe that anymore, you know, but his wife asked me for that. Can you pray for him? What am I going to tell her? No, I don't believe that anymore. No. So I said, well, of course you have my best wishes and my good thoughts. I mean, you have all of that. I just don't know that it's effective anymore, So, but you do crave that because it feels normal. It feels protective and safe. Yeah. So you crave it, which is, again, part of that whole process of grieving, that bargaining.
I mean, it's the closest relationship a lot of people have, closer than their partner, even on some level, depending on how they engage with it. And it's like going through a divorce. It's like going through the death of a loved one, or it really is no wonder people experience grief, experience post-traumatic stress, experience all these things. Absolutely.
It's devastating. Yeah. It's just devastating.
It's fascinating. For me, it never really was. I actually really have enjoyed this journey the whole way through.
You're one of those people.
I'm a freak. And I'm introverted, so I like being lonely anyway. But it's a weird one. But and I have a whole bunch of different weird components to my personal makeup that make that viable.
Yeah,
and
we all
how much
have
I'm disconnected with it and displace everything. Or who knows? But it's really fascinating. Really fascinating. Well, awesome, dude. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Michelle. I really
thank
you so much of your time. How can people engage with what you're doing? Is obviously, if they're into fitness, Instagram, obviously.
Instagram is it. Although you have to put up with my pictures constantly of me trying to see if I see muscle or not. Instagram is pretty much dedicated to that. I don't usually cross my venue there. That stays that. Sure. Facebook, you can get both.
Okay.
Facebook, I do a lot of writing on Facebook. I do a lot of more snarky comments lately. Some of my fitness stuff is there. I do have a group on Facebook called Constructive Deconstruction.
Okay.
I've not been too active in it lately, but people still add to it every now and then. And there's just different conversations about different things that people are asking or questioning. I think we've only had Discord in there one time and we kind of settled that, and it's been a happy group since then.
What's your handle on Facebook? How do people find, just if they search your name, or they like it to come up?
I think it's Shelvis. I think it's Shelvis88. I think, or no, maybe that's my Instagram.
That's your Instagram for sure. Don't worry. If you can't find it, I can hunt it out, and I'll add it in the show notes.
I think it's just Michelle Collins. It's just Michelle Collins. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So I always feel bad at this question because I always feel like there's supposed to be more outlets of me somewhere, but there's just not. It's just Facebook, Instagram. And then my podcast is, it's on Podbean. Bookish. It's on iTunes. Right. Bookish, the Canon Continues. Yeah. So, and that's from Quoir Publishing, Quoir Publishing. If anybody's interested, they're a great publisher. They're getting bigger and bringing in more people. So,
awesome.
Yeah, great people there. So yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm not in a whole lot of places. So.
No, that's fantastic.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah. Well, keep me posted on how things are going as well. I want to know more about the avenues that you start to go into as you start fleshing out your doctorate more. Yeah. If I can help as well, I've got.
I was already had that in the back of my mind. Like if you're doing research there, that's a good thing to have access to.
We can put together one of my. We put out surveys that are 5-10 minutes, kind of fleshed out, and we have different sections and different things, but we're amassing collective data, so we're building on that comparison.
That'll be really helpful.
It's going to be insane, but we could maybe give you one of those slots if you want to do a
that'd be awesome
kind of thing.
Well, I'm a couple years away from it. I'm still doing requirements for the doctorate.
Oh my gosh, depth of data.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. In another 2 years, it should be a really good resource. So
I'm very, very excited. So yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah,
that's great.
Keep in touch. I'll obviously, as you're on Facebook now, as you can see, Instagram is probably not the forte I should be connecting with you, or maybe it is the place I should be connecting with you.
Whatever works. I don't mind either one. So
I'm a rock climber, and we go to the gym.
Really?
To climb, but we do it 3 times a week. Always love it. Climb for a couple hours every week at least, like each time.
I haven't done that.
And it is an incredible full body workout. You find muscles that you didn't know you had.
I imagine.
Weird ways. But we've not, they've all been shut. It's like a coronavirus heaven. It's like just a wall with lots of handles that thousands of people touch all day.
Yeah.
That's not a good idea. Not good. So we've not been for a long time, and I feel it.
I live around a ton of trailheads and stuff, but unfortunately they're all closed right now because hiking was my deal for a long time.
Okay.
I would do 20, 25 miles a week in hiking, and I haven't been able to do that. So the gym became my thing again. But then I started bodybuilding again, which I did when I was younger, and I decided to be competitive again. And so now that's become a very singular focus. So I always warn people, if you're going to go see me on Instagram, it's not going to be anything theological at all. It's just all a bunch of posing and muscle stuff. That's all that is.
That's so funny. I was so sure I had the wrong person when he sent me the link. I was like, because he's like, oh yeah, here's our link. I was like, well, where did I find out more about this person? He's like, here's our Instagram. And I was like,
wait a minute.
And how this is anything to do with psychology or grief or deconstruction. So
funny. How sad.
I still went in there. I was like, hey, I hear you're doing this. Like, you want to talk? So
my Facebook has way more all kinds.
I'm
of
excited
like
to go
that,
check it.
So.
It's Facebook, so I'll probably be very careful. And that group that you mentioned, the constructing deconstruction, is that right? Constructive deconstruction. Yeah. That's open to anyone who wants to join?
Yeah, there's a little questionnaire at the beginning when you do it. That's just so basically I know what's going on. But yeah, it's not been like a super active group, but there's definitely people in there. There's still conversations. Unfortunately, I end up asking a lot of the same questions out on my normal public page. And so a lot of the conversation ends up there.
Overlaps.
So
Yeah.
Awesome. So
great. Well, I'll definitely send people to those places and
thank you.
Stay in touch. But yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, great to meet you. Thank you for chatting.
Of course.
Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, you as well. Oh, you get to go to sleep now.
I'm gonna get to bed. I'm gonna have to unwind. I can't help. This is the introvert in me. I'm gonna need to read a book for another half hour or something.
Oh no, I totally get you. I'll be done for the rest of the day on talking. So
there you go.
My husband will come home. I'm like, nope,
get away.
We're done. Nope, I'm out of my quota today. So.
Well, thank you. Honestly, 2.5 hours. Well done. So yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Have a good one. Bye.